She thought she was buying a ruin no one wanted, a house blackened by fire, sold for $700 and a whisper of hope. But when she stepped inside those ashes, the air moved, as if the mansion itself remembered. Behind the scorched fireplace bricks, something waited, something worth $300 million, and a curse that refused to die. Every shadow told her to leave. Every heartbeat told her to stay. What she uncovered would turn poverty into legend, and a mother's desperation into the most shocking discovery ever buried by flame. After the final notice was nailed to her apartment door, Elena Ramirez stood frozen in the dim hallway, the paper trembling in her hand like a verdict. Her world had shrunk to a single envelope, a reminder that life doesn't wait for mercy. Rent overdue, power disconnected, her son's shoes too small, his backpack frayed like her hope. The city outside kept moving, honking, laughing, living while she stood still, buried under the quiet weight of what now? For months, she had been chasing hours double shifts at the diner, cleaning offices after midnight, eyes burning from bleach and sleeplessness. Every dollar she made was swallowed by something else. Every prayer she whispered returned in silence. And yet, beneath the exhaustion, there was something fierce still burning the part of her that refused to let her son, Matteo, slip through the cracks the world had made for people like them. That morning, the wind carried the smell of rain and smoke through the city, the kind of scent that felt like endings. Elena clutched her old phone, scrolling through government auction listings she didn't really understand. Properties burned, abandoned, condemned. Most people saw wreckage. She saw a chance. $700 less than what she owed in rent. A number that shouldn't have meant anything, but somehow it did. The photo showed a mansion, or what was left of one, a skeletal frame of blackened beams and ivy, choked gates. Lot 47, Ramirez County, sold as is. The name caught her. Ramirez, her name. Coincidence, maybe. Or something else. She couldn't afford to dream, but that night she did anyway. When the auction ended, her finger hovered, heart-pounding. $700, her last thread of survival. She pressed bid, not out of courage, but out of exhaustion. Out of a desperate belief that the universe owed her something, anything after everything it had taken. The screen blinked. Congratulations, you are the winning bidder. Her knees almost gave out. Not from joy, but from fear. She had just bought a burn, doubt, ruin, no refunds, no guarantees, no electricity, just ashes, a deed, and a fragile hope she couldn't afford to lose. The next morning, she told Matteo they were moving. He didn't ask why. He just nodded, trusting her the way children do when they don't yet know the world's cruelty. They packed their lives into 2 duffel bags, a few clothes, a framed photo of his father, and a tin box of unpaid bills she didn't have the heart to throw away. The road out of the city stretched gray and endless. The rain chased them halfway there, turning the world into a blur of headlights and memory. Matteo slept in the passenger seat, his face soft, untroubled, a small mercy she watched like it might vanish. When the sign appeared, Old Briar Estate Road, she slowed. The trees leaned over the road like watchers, branches heavy with moss. The mansion appeared suddenly, as if it had been waiting, tall, charred, and silent against the dull sky. The iron gates were rusted, but still bore a crest halves, wallowed by vines. For a moment she just stared. It was beautiful in a broken way, the kind of beauty that hurts to look at. The air was thick with the scent of wet earth and old smoke. The steps groaned under her boots as she climbed them, one by one. The front door hung crooked, scorched around the edges. She pushed it open, and the sound echoed through the hollow halls like a sigh. Inside, the world was blackened, walls wept soot, ceilings peeled like old skin. Yet sunlight still dared to enter through shattered windows, spilling across dust and ruin. Her footsteps stirred echoes of what once was the faint impression of chandeliers, laughter, and something more haunting: absence. Matteo wandered behind her, clutching his stuffed bear, voice small. "Mom, it smells like the fire's still here." She swallowed. Maybe it is. Every room they passed was a graveyard of memory-melted glass, twisted frames, piano keys curled like teeth. But one thing stood untouched: the great stone fireplace at the heart of the house. Blackened but unbroken, its mantel still stood proud, carved with intricate vines and a crest she couldn't quite decipher. It felt wrong untouched, like it had been waiting. She stood before it, drawn without knowing why. The ashes inside were cold, but beneath them something gleamed faintly in the dim light, a shard of metal, maybe, or just her imagination. "Maybe we can fix it up," Matteo said softly, his optimism both painful and pure. "Make it ours." Elena smiled, though her eyes stung. "Yeah, ours." But deep down, she knew this house wasn't just empty. It was watching. That night, as the storm rolled in and the wind howled through the broken glass, Elena lay awake on the floor beside her sleeping son. Rain whispered across the roof like footsteps. Somewhere in the distance, a shutter slammed shut. She turned toward the fireplace. Even in darkness, it seemed to glow faintly, as if the stone still remembered the flames that once devoured it. Outside, thunder rolled deep, slow, like something stirring beneath the earth. Elena closed her eyes and whispered a prayer she didn't believe in anymore. "As long as he's safe," she murmured, voice breaking. "That's all that matters." Lightning flared. For a moment the room lit up and she saw it. The faint outline of a handprint burned into the stone of the fireplace, fresh. Her breath caught. The light faded and silence returned, thick, heavy, endless. As the night deepened, she pulled her son closer and stared into the dark, unaware that the fire she feared most had only just begun. Morning came gray and silent, the kind of silence that clings to ruin. Mist drifted through the cracks of the broken windows, carrying the cold scent of rain and earth. Elena woke before sunrise, her body aching from the hard floor, the echo of last night's thunder still whispering in her ears. For a moment, she forgot where she was until she saw the blackened walls and the faint trace of that handprint burned into the fireplace stone. Matteo was still asleep, his small form curled beneath a thin blanket. She watched him breathe, each rise and fall a reason to keep going. The world could fall apart 100 times over, but she would still find a way to keep him safe. She pushed herself up, brushed ash from her hair, and stared out through the cracked window. The land stretched far and wild fields grown thick with weeds, a driveway swallowed by vines, the ghost of a fountain standing dry and forgotten. It should have felt hopeless. Instead, something inside her sparked the stubborn pulse of a woman who'd been told no too many times and was still standing. By noon, she had a broom in her hands, sweeping what could be swept. Every sound in that hollow house echoed too loudly: the drag of dust, the creak of each floorboard, the whisper of her own breath. The air carried a strange electricity, as if the walls themselves were remembering. She found an old metal bucket near the kitchen, half crushed, filled with rainwater. The sink didn't work. The pipes moaned like something alive. Still, she kept cleaning. She scraped ash from the hearth, scrubbed away soot with her bare hands until her knuckles stung and the stone showed hints of its old ivory color. Every mark she erased felt like reclaiming a heartbeat. When Matteo woke, he joined her, sweeping with a stick he found outside, his laughter echoing through the hollow house. It sounded foreign, too bright for so much decay. She let him laugh anyway. Maybe the mansion needed to hear it. By sunset, they had cleared the main hall. Dust hung in golden light, spinning like fireflies in the fading glow. Elena leaned against the wall, breathing hard, hands streaked with grime. She could almost see it, not the ruin before her, but what it might become. A home. That night they made a small fire in a metal pan near the hearth. The warmth was faint, but it was enough. The flicker of flame reflected in Matteo's eyes, turning the room into a fragile sanctuary. He broke the silence first. "Mom, why did no one want this place?" She hesitated. "Because people only see what's broken." "Do you?" She smiled faintly. "I see what's left." The fire crackled. Somewhere in the walls, something settled, a low, hollow thump like shifting stone. She froze, her eyes darting toward the fireplace, but nothing moved. The house groaned again, as if exhaling after years of holding its breath. Later, when Matteo had drifted to sleep, she sat by the fire, the shadows long and trembling. She opened her purse and took out the deed, its edges water-stained, the ink barely legible, her name written beside a stranger's signature, ownership. It didn't feel real. In the dim light, her gaze drifted to the carvings above the fireplace. Vines, leaves, a crest almost erased by soot. But when the flames flickered, she saw something she hadn't before, small markings like letters, hidden within the pattern. She leaned closer, tracing the grooves with her fingertips. Not English, not anything she recognized, but deliberate, ancient, purposeful. Her breath slowed. For the first time since she'd stepped inside, she felt the weight of being watched, not by a person, but by memory itself. A gust of wind hissed through the cracks. The fire shuddered, dimmed, then flared higher, too high. The air pulsed with sudden heat. Elena stumbled back, shielding her face. And then, just as quickly, it calmed, the flames returning to their quiet dance. Her heart hammered. She stared into the embers, searching for reason, logic, anything. But all she saw were shapes forming in the glow, circles, lines. A symbol burned faintly in the coals, like something whispering from beneath the ash. She didn't sleep that night. When morning came, she found herself drawn back to the fireplace again. The markings on the stone looked different in daylight, sharper, deeper, like the house had changed them overnight. She took a piece of chalk from her son's school supplies and traced the pattern, trying to make sense of it. Beneath the soot, faint words emerged, carved so fine they almost vanished. "The hearth remembers." She stepped back, heart racing. It meant nothing and everything. The phrase clung to her mind like a melody she couldn't place. Outside, the wind rose again, carrying the faintest echo, a sound too soft to be real, too human to be imagination. A whisper, drawn through the chimney's throat. She froze. The house was breathing. Elena stood motionless, every instinct screaming to leave. But poverty has a way of muting fear. Where else could she go? What landlord would take her? What future waited beyond these burned walls? She forced a breath, whispering into the quiet, "You're just tired, Lena, just tired." But the whisper that returned from the chimney was not her own. She turned sharply, eyes on the hearth. The air above it shimmered just faintly like heat over desert sand. Then it was gone. Her pulse wouldn't calm. She reached into her pocket, fingers trembling, and pulled out her phone. No signal. The house sat miles from town, alone, cut off, surrounded by forest that swallowed sound. And yet, beneath the fear, there was something else rising, curiosity. The same reckless spark that made her click bid that night when reason said no. Maybe the house wasn't cursed. Maybe it was just alive. She didn't tell Matteo what she'd seen. Some truths need to stay quiet until they have a shape. That evening, as the sun bled through the broken windows, painting the floor in gold and shadow, she stood before the fireplace one last time. The carved words caught the last light, glowing faintly. "The hearth remembers." She whispered to it, half mocking, half pleading, "Then remember me kindly." The fire inside the metal pan flickered once, as if answering, and somewhere behind the stone, beneath years of soot and silence, something shifted. The faintest metallic click echoed through the wall, a sound too precise, too deliberate. Elena's breath hitched. She pressed her hand against the fireplace, feeling a faint vibration beneath the stone, a hidden pulse she couldn't explain. She didn't know it yet, but in that moment, she had awakened something buried, something waiting since the night the mansion burned. As dusk settled over the ruins, she whispered, "We'll make this home again," her voice trembling between hope and defiance. But the house seemed to hum in reply, low, hollow, almost like laughter carried through the ash. And as the night deepened, Elena Ramirez learned that in places built on secrets, even silence has memory. After that night, something in the house had changed, or maybe it was Elena who had. The morning light didn't feel warm anymore. It slipped through the windows like it was trespassing, cutting across the dust in narrow, trembling lines. Every sound carried an echo now, the whisper of her steps, the creak of the old floorboards, even the quiet breath of her son sleeping in the next room. The mansion seemed alive, listening. Elena told herself she was being foolish. Grief, exhaustion, the endless weight of uncertainty, they could twist reality into anything. Still, she couldn't ignore the faint hum she felt whenever she stood near the fireplace. Like the stones themselves remembered something she wasn't supposed to know. Mateo, bright-eyed and curious as ever, had claimed the upstairs hallway as his adventure zone. He ran through the long corridor, his laughter chasing the shadows that pooled in corners. It had been so long since she'd heard him laugh freely. For a moment, it made her forget the debt, the fear, the ache. But as his small footsteps echoed, she realized it sounded like more than one child running. She turned sharply. "Mateo," he stopped at the top of the stairs, panting. "Yeah, were you talking to someone?" He tilted his head. "No, I was just playing." He pointed toward one of the blackened doorways. "But I heard someone say my name. A little boy." Elena's stomach dropped. "A little boy," he nodded, matter of factly. "He said his name was Illy. He said the fire was his fault." The air thickened. She tried to smile to make it sound like nothing. "Maybe you just imagined it, baby. Sometimes houses make funny noises." Mateo frowned, unconvinced, but shrugged and went back to exploring. Elena stood still, her hands trembling just slightly. A child's name, Illy. The word echoed through her chest like a whisper she'd already heard but couldn't place. That evening, she decided to clean the library, or what was left of it. The shelves were blackened skeletons, the books reduced to cinders. The air was still heavy with the scent of old smoke, sharp and sweet. She brushed her fingers along one shelf, and something flaked off, not ash, but paper, half burned, stuck between two boards. She pried it free carefully, coughing as dust filled the air. It wasn't just paper. It was a book, or what remained of one. The leather cover was scorched, but still faintly embossed with initials. E.W. The pages were brittle, the ink faded and warped by water and heat. But when she opened it, a name leapt from the charred paper. Elias Whitmore, Illy. Her pulse stuttered. The handwriting was old, looping, the kind used a century ago. She turned the pages carefully, her breath shallow. The words were fragments, burned away at the edges, but enough survived to tell a story. "The house breathes again. I fear the fire did not kill it. The gold is still beneath the hearth. The others do not understand. They think it is a myth. But I saw it. The fire tried to bury it, but the fire serves it. The rest was gone. Charred to nothing." Elena closed the book slowly, heart pounding. It couldn't be real. Some old journal from a child's imagination, maybe. But the fireplace, the whispers, the handprint, every piece was stitching itself together into something she didn't yet understand. As night fell, the temperature dropped. The mansion groaned in its sleep. Elena tucked Matteo into a small cot she'd set up in what used to be a guest room. The walls were cracked, the ceiling stained with soot, but it was safe for now. "Mom," he murmured, half asleep. "Illy said not to light the big fire." Her body froze. "What?" He blinked drowsily. "He said the gold doesn't like fire." Her throat went dry. "Honey, you must have dreamt that." But he only smiled faintly, his small hand clutching his bear. "He said the fire talks back." Elena sat there long after he'd fallen asleep, her mind a storm. The book, the whispers, the carvings, there was no logic left to hold on to. Only instinct, and instinct told her that something beneath this mansion was awake. She went downstairs again, lantern in hand. The air grew colder the closer she came to the hearth. When she knelt and brushed away the ash she'd cleaned earlier, her fingers touched something rough, a groove cut deep into the stone. A symbol matching the one she'd seen faintly in the coals before. She traced it, and the flame in her lantern flickered violently, nearly going out. The shadows in the corners seemed to stretch, bending toward her like smoke drawn to a breath. For a heartbeat, she thought she saw movement, a shape reflected in the glass of a broken picture frame. A boy, standing just beyond the firelight, his face pale, eyes wide. Her voice broke through the still air. "Who's there?" The room answered with silence, and then, softly, a whisper, not from the room, but from inside the chimney itself. "It remembers." Elena stumbled backward, the lantern shaking in her hand. The whisper faded, swallowed by the sound of distant rain. She pressed a hand to her mouth to stop the trembling. Her rational mind screamed to leave, to take her son and run, but there was nowhere left to go. She had bought this house out of desperation, and now desperation was the only reason she stayed. As the storm rose outside, she sat in front of the cold fireplace, the half-burned journal open in her lap. Lightning flashed, illuminating the carvings on the mantel. For the briefest second, she saw what she had missed before the outline of a second crest, hidden within the first, faintly etched beneath layers of soot. Two families, two legacies, and one truth buried in flame. She whispered into the dark, "What happened here?" The firebox sighed, as though exhaling memory. Somewhere deep inside the wall, something shifted, a hollow knock, then another, like a heartbeat returning. Elena stared at the hearth, tears burning behind her eyes, fear and fascination tangled inside her. She didn't believe in ghosts, but this didn't feel like haunting. It felt like a secret trying to be heard. She closed the book slowly, ran her fingers over the burned name Elias Whitmore, and whispered, "If you can hear me, I'm listening." The lantern flickered once, twice, then the flame steadied, and in that quiet, something unseen seemed to sigh with relief. Outside, the storm began to fade. Inside, the mansion settled again, waiting. But the next time Elena would open that journal, she would discover that the boy's final entry ended mid-sentence, and that the story he started had never really ended at all. As the night deepened, the house fell still again. Yet somewhere behind those stone walls, the fire whispered her name. After the storm had passed, Elena awoke to the sound of dripping water somewhere deep in the house. Morning light crept through the shattered windows like cautious fingers, sliding across the burned walls and resting on her face. The air still smelled faintly of smoke, not from the past fire, but something older, something buried in the bones of this house. She sat up slowly, her back aching, and for a moment forgot where she was. Then the reality hit the mansion, the silence, the promise of a new beginning that already felt haunted. Matteo stirred beside her, his blanket half kicked away, his hair messy and golden in the pale light. He looked peaceful, untouched by the strange unease that seemed to fill every corner of the estate. She didn't want to wake him yet. Childhood, she thought, was the last fragile thing she could still protect. Elena rose quietly, pulling on her jacket against the morning chill. The house greeted her with its groans and sighs, wood settling, plaster cracking, wind whispering through holes in the walls. It should have been ordinary, explainable. But each sound felt deliberate, as though the house was watching her move, remembering her from the night before. She walked down the corridor, stepping over broken floorboards and melted glass, until she reached the grand staircase. The steps were blackened and slick with soot. The handrail splintered but still standing, twisted in elegant curves. She ran her fingers along it and shivered. The wood was cold, almost wet, as though the fire had never truly gone out, just gone inside. In the kitchen, daylight filtered through torn curtains, catching the floating dust in slow spirals. The air smelled of rust, decay, and something faintly metallic like blood that had dried a long time ago. She filled a cracked mug with rainwater she'd collected in a bucket and took a sip. Bitter, metallic. Still it was water. Matteo appeared in the doorway, rubbing his eyes. "Mom, the house was talking last night." Elena froze. "Talking?" He nodded, yawning. "It said my name. It sounded like it was under the floor." She forced a smile, though her stomach tightened. "Probably the wind, sweetheart. Old houses make strange noises." He stared at her for a moment, then shrugged and wandered toward the fireplace. He was drawn to it, same as she was, as if some invisible thread pulled them both closer to that heart of stone and soot. Elena followed. The hearth looked different in the morning light. The carvings she had traced the night before seemed sharper, deeper, the pattern of vines twisting into something that looked almost like letters. She crouched down, brushing away more ash, and saw a faint inscription beneath the mantel. "Hearthkeeper's Promise." The words were barely legible, carved so faintly she thought at first they were cracks. She whispered them under her breath, the syllables heavy and strange. Matteo watched her, silent now, his small face serious. "Mom," he said softly, "what's a hearthkeeper?" She looked at him, then back at the carving. "Someone who protects the fire," she murmured, "or maybe someone who's protected by it." He blinked, like a ghost. She smiled faintly, though the words sent a chill through her. "No, baby, ghosts don't protect anyone." But she wasn't sure anymore. That afternoon, she decided to explore the West Wing, the one place she hadn't entered yet. The hallway, there smelled of wet ash and time. The wallpaper had melted into dark, curling ribbons. When she pushed open one of the doors, the hinge screamed like a living thing. Inside, she found what looked like a study. The walls were lined with what used to be shelves. A desk sat in the corner, its legs charred, one drawer hanging open. She knelt beside it and saw something half buried under the debris, a book, scorched along the edges, its cover cracked but still intact. She brushed away the ash and read the name pressed into the leather, Elias Whitmore, the same name from Matteo's dream. Her heart skipped. She opened the cover carefully. The pages were brittle, burned at the corners, words swallowed by black scars. But parts of it remained legible. "The gold is not gone, the fire did not take it, the house guards it now, the hearth remembers the oath." Elena stopped reading. The handwriting was old, maybe 100 years old, but the fear in it felt fresh. She turned another page, but the rest was too damaged to read. On the final page, written sideways in hurried, shaking ink, were the words, "Don't open what the fire sealed." A draft swept through the room, snuffing her candle. For a moment she sat in darkness, heart pounding in her throat. "Mom," Matteo's voice called faintly from the hall. "I'm here," she said quickly, Shoving the journal into her jacket pocket, he appeared in the doorway, frowning. I heard knocking. She froze. Where? He pointed toward the fireplace in the main hall. Inside there. Elena took his hand, her fingers cold. Together they walked back. The hearth stood silent now, the air around it unnaturally still. She could hear her own heartbeat, slow and heavy, then a sound, faint, distant, a single hollow knock. Matteo squeezed her hand. It's him again. Who? She whispered. The boy from my dream. He said softly, Illy. The name landed in the air like a ghost of its own. Elena forced herself to move closer. The stones were cold beneath her palm, but as she pressed against them, she felt something vibrate deep within, a low hum, like breath trapped behind the wall. She leaned in until she could hear it, and then a whisper, so soft it barely existed, You shouldn't have come. Elena stumbled back, pulling Matteo with her. The room fell silent again, as though the house had exhaled. Her pulse thundered in her ears, her breath coming fast. She stared at the fireplace, at the faint carvings above it, at the burned word hearthkeeper, and she knew the house wasn't haunted. It was guarding something. Matteo tugged her sleeve. Mom, are we leaving? She looked down at him, the trust in his eyes. The fragility of his world balanced entirely on her strength, and she lied. No, baby, it's just the house settling. But in her heart, she knew the truth. The house wasn't settling. It was waking up. That night, as the wind rose and the old boards groaned, Elena sat alone beside the hearth, the burned journal open in her lap. She stared into the dark mouth of the fireplace, where the light didn't reach, where the air felt too still. The words replayed in her mind, Don't open what the fire sealed. She should have listened, because behind those stones something shifted again, slow, deliberate, as if the mansion itself was turning its gaze toward her. And in the flicker of the dying lantern, a faint outline appeared in the soot, a child's face, smiling through the ashes. Elena didn't scream. She couldn't. Her breath simply stopped. As the night deepened, the mansion whispered once more, not in warning, but in recognition. It had found its new keeper. The next morning came dull and grey, heavy with the kind of silence that presses against the chest. Elena didn't remember falling asleep. One moment she'd been staring at the fireplace, and the next, sunlight was bleeding through the windows, cutting across the floorboards like pale knives. Matteo was still sleeping, his little hand curled beneath his chin, unbothered by the unease that sat thick in the air. Elena rose slowly, her body stiff, her mind fogged with the weight of what she had seen, or what she thought she had seen. That face in the soot, that whisper, maybe it had been exhaustion, maybe the tricks of firelight and grief. But deep down she knew better. The air in the mansion had changed. It was heavier now, listening, remembering. She walked toward the hearth again, every step a quiet defiance. The stone felt colder than before, the markings sharper. She knelt down, running her fingers over the phrase carved into it, the hearthkeeper's promise. The soot from her touch left grey streaks on her skin, like the house was marking her back. Her eyes drifted to the half-burned journal on the floor beside her. She picked it up, opening to the first legible page. The handwriting was frantic, slanted, each word pressed deep into the paper as though written in panic. The house knows when strangers enter. The fire watches them. It remembers every oath. The next page was worse. The ink smeared, the sentences unfinished. Mother says the gold will never belong to anyone. It listens. It wants to stay here. The rest was gone, burned away. Elena's throat tightened. She felt something between pity and dread. Whoever wrote this Elias, the child Matteo had spoken of, had lived here, breathed the same air, walked the same halls, and the house had remembered him. From upstairs came a sudden crash. A door slamming. Matteo, no answer. She ran to the staircase, her bare feet slipping on ash. The sound echoed again, a dull thud from the hall above. She reached the landing and froze. A single door stood open at the far end, swaying slightly though there was no wind. "Matteo," her voice cracked. "Where are you?" From inside the room came a faint reply. "Here, Mom." Relief flooded her for a second until she realized the voice didn't sound right. It was Matteo's tone, but hollow, distant, as if coming through a long tunnel. Elena's breath caught. She stepped closer. The floorboards groaned beneath her, each one a warning. When she reached the doorway, the air inside was cold enough to sting. The room was empty. Only a broken rocking chair stood in the corner, its movement so slow and steady that it took her a moment to realize what she was seeing. It was rocking on its own. Elena whispered, "Stop." The chair creaked once, then went still. For a long time, she didn't move. The silence in that room was thick, absolute. Then she heard it again, a whisper so close it felt like breath against her ear. "He's mine now." She turned sharply, her heart slamming in her chest. Nothing, just shadows and dust. She bolted from the room, nearly tripping down the stairs. Matteo was in the kitchen, sitting at the table, humming softly to himself as he drew on a piece of cardboard with a dull pencil. He looked up, smiling. "Morning, Mom." She rushed to him, grabbing his shoulders. "Were you upstairs?" He blinked. "No, I've been here." Elena stared, her pulse hammering in her ears. "Then who?" She stopped herself. He didn't need to hear that. He didn't need to see the fear that was quickly consuming her. She forced a shaky smile. "It's nothing, sweetheart. The house just makes strange sounds, that's all." But as she said it, she noticed what he was drawing, a crude sketch of the mansion. All blackened walls and crooked windows. And in the center, near the fireplace, a small boy standing beside the flames. "Who's that?" she asked softly. Matteo looked up. "Matter of fact, that's silly. He says we're friends now." Her stomach turned to ice. "What do you mean?" "He says he used to live here. He said his dad hid something behind the fire and it made everyone angry." Matteo's tone was innocent, casual, like he was sharing a secret from school. "He said the house doesn't like when people lie." Elena knelt, gripping the table edge to steady herself. "Honey, when did he tell you that?" He frowned, as though it were a strange question. "Just now. He's standing right there." Elena turned, her blood running cold. There was nothing, only the faint shimmer of heat above the cold ashes of the hearth. She didn't scream. She couldn't. The rest of that day passed in uneasy silence. Elena moved through the house like someone walking on sacred ground, afraid to disturb whatever was awake within its walls. The air felt charged, alive. Every creak of wood, every whisper of wind carried meaning. By evening, the pressure had grown unbearable, a feeling like being watched from the inside out. When the sun dipped below the trees, she lit a small lamp near the hearth. The light trembled, throwing shadows that danced across the walls like ghosts trying to find form. Matteo slept nearby, wrapped in blankets on the couch, clutching his bear tight. Elena sat beside the fire, the journal open again. One line caught her eye near the middle half, burned, written in a different hand. A woman's hand, finer and calmer than the frantic scrawl before it. "Elias keeps saying the gold whispers to him, that it hums beneath the floor. He said the fire knows how to find it, that it speaks in cracks and ash. I told him not to listen, but he only smiled. He said the house already chose him." Elena closed the book slowly, her fingers trembling. The boy, the fire, the treasure, it was all connected, and it wasn't just a story. Outside, thunder rolled again, low and distant. The air inside the house stirred, faintly shifting the ash inside the hearth. She stared into it, afraid but unable to look away. Then a sound, a single soft knock from inside the wall. Her breath caught. Another, and then a whisper, this time unmistakable. "He's waiting, Elena," her name. Spoken clearly, tenderly, like an old friend. The lamp flickered, then went out. In the sudden darkness, She could feel it, the heat radiating faintly from the hearth, though no fire burned there. She backed away, fumbling for her flashlight, but it wouldn't turn on. The air seemed to pulse, the shadows deepening, and in that suffocating quiet, she realized she could hear breathing, soft, rhythmic, not her own. Then a child's voice, faint and close. "You shouldn't try to open it yet." She turned toward the sound, but there was only smoke curling upward from the ashes, slow, twisting, forming the faint outline of small hands pressed against the inside of the stone. Elena fell to her knees, heart pounding. "What do you want?" she whispered. The voice came again, almost kind. "I want to finish what I started." The room went still. The air turned cold enough to sting her lungs. And then, as quickly as it began, the presence faded, leaving only silence and the faint smell of burning wood that wasn't really there. Elena stayed there long into the night, staring at the cold fireplace until dawn bled through the windows once more. She didn't know what it was, or what the boy meant. But she knew one thing with absolute certainty: the mansion wasn't done with her. It had chosen her, just as it had chosen him. And as the morning light crept back across the room, the words above the hearth seemed sharper now, freshly carved as if written overnight. "Only the rightful fire may open the gate." Elena staggered back, whispering through trembling lips, "What gate?" But deep inside the chimney, behind the cold stone and centuries of ash, something stirred, a sound like the turning of gears long forgotten. And as the sun rose, the mansion exhaled a long, slow sigh, alive again, waiting for the fire to return. By the time the third morning came, the house had gone quiet again, too quiet, the kind of silence that doesn't feel empty but expectant. Elena woke to the faint tick of her wristwatch, the soft wind brushing through broken glass, and the unmistakable pulse of something unseen waiting for her to move. She lay still for a moment, listening to her own heartbeat echo through the mansion's hollow ribs. Matteo slept soundly on the couch beside her, his little arm draped over his bear, unbothered by the strange hush that filled the air. She envied him the way he could still dream while the walls around them breathed like lungs that had never quite died. Elena rose, her bare feet silent on the cold wooden floor. The morning light bled through the cracks, pale and thin, painting dust into golden smoke. Every breath she took felt heavier than the last. Something about the mansion had changed again. The air wasn't just still, it was listening. She tried to shake it off. Fear wouldn't pay bills, and ghosts wouldn't fix walls. Today, she told herself, would be different. She'd start repairs, clean, patch, maybe call someone to check the foundation if she could scrape enough money together. She refused to let her fear own her. By mid-morning, a battered truck pulled up the long dirt road, carrying a local handyman named Carl who'd answered her ad. He stepped out, chewing gum, looking around the estate with a mix of awe and unease. "You sure you want to fix this place, ma'am?" he asked, eyes squinting at the mansion's charred frame. Elena forced a smile. "I don't really have a choice." He chuckled softly. "Ain't about choice, it's about courage. Houses like this, they don't like to be woken." She frowned. "What do you mean?" He shrugged, grabbing his toolbox. "Locals say the fire here wasn't just bad luck. Say the man who owned this place, the Baron, or whatever, made a deal with gold and got burned for it. You know how folks talk." Elena's pulse quickened. "You believe that?" Carl gave her a long look. "I believe wood remembers heat and some walls remember screams. That's enough for me." He got to work patching the cracked plaster near the living room while Elena swept away the remnants of their small fire from the night before. The air was thick with dust and old smoke. Every now and then, Carl would stop hammering and tilt his head, as though he'd heard something beneath the noise. "You hear that?" he asked suddenly. "Hear what?" He turned toward the far wall, the one beside the fireplace. "Like someone knocking from inside." Her breath caught. "It's probably just the pipes." He stared at her, his face pale. "Lady, this place ain't got working pipes." Before she could answer, a sharp crack split the air. The wall Carl had been patching fractured straight down the middle, plaster crumbling away to reveal something beneath, not brick, but stone, carved with strange markings. "What the hell?" Carl muttered, stepping back. Elena's pulse thudded in her ears. The carvings were the same symbols she'd seen on the hearth, looping shapes that looked like letters or maybe warnings. She reached out, brushing away the dust. Beneath the soot, she could make out faint words, though they weren't in English. Carl swore under his breath. "Yeah, no, this ain't just an old house." He wiped his hands on his jeans. "I've seen enough weird stuff fixing barns and basements, but this feels wrong." "Please," Elena said, desperate. "Just a few more hours. I'll pay extra." He hesitated, then shook his head. "Ma'am, some things ain't meant to be fixed." He packed his tools, muttering as he left, "You should get a priest, not a handyman." The sound of his truck faded down the road, leaving her alone with the soft hum of silence again. Elena stared at the cracked wall. Dust swirled where Carl had stood. Then, faintly, from within the stone, came the whisper. "Why did you wake us?" She froze. Her breath hitched in her throat. The words were clear, too clear. "Who's there?" she whispered. Silence. Then, a faint scraping like fingers brushing the inside of the wall. Elena stumbled back, hand trembling as she reached for her flashlight. She pointed it at the crack, but the light seemed to bend, swallowed by the darkness within. For a second, she thought she saw movement, the faintest shimmer, like smoke trapped behind glass. Then it was gone. She backed away until she hit the opposite wall, chest rising and falling fast. "It's just my imagination," she whispered. "It's just the house." But the whisper came again, softer now, almost kind. "Not imagination, memory." Elena's knees weakened. The voice wasn't angry, it sounded lonely, like someone remembering pain too long buried. She fled the room, heart hammering, and ran out onto the porch, gasping in the cold air. The world outside was still and grey, the forest shrouded in fog. For a long time she stood there, shaking. Then Matteo appeared in the doorway, rubbing his eyes. "Mom, why are you outside?" She turned quickly, forcing a smile. "Just getting some air." He squinted past her. "Illy says the walls don't like being opened." Her stomach dropped. "What?" He shrugged innocently. "He told me while you were talking to the man. He said the house keeps secrets in the stone so the fire won't find them again." Elena knelt, gripping his shoulders. "Matteo, where did you see him?" He pointed toward the cracked wall. "He was standing there. He said he remembers everything." Her throat tightened. She didn't want to frighten him, didn't want to make him carry her fear. "Sweetheart," she said gently, "sometimes when people are lonely, they imagine friends. That's all Illy is." "Okay," Matteo frowned. "Then why does he know your name?" The air went still. That night, Elena worked alone, patching the broken plaster herself. The sound of her trowel scraping stone filled the air. She tried not to think about the whispers, or the strange pulse beneath the walls, or the way the air seemed to change when the fire burned. But as midnight crept closer, the temperature dropped. Her breath became visible, curling in front of her face. The trowel slipped from her hand, clattering to the floor. From somewhere deep inside the wall came a hollow knock, then another, and then whispering. Dozens of voices this time, layered and distant, like memories overlapping. She couldn't understand the words, but she could feel them pleading, warning, remembering. She pressed her palms against the wall, her voice trembling. "What do you want from me?" For a heartbeat, the whispers stopped. Then one voice, faint and familiar, rose above the rest. "The fire chose you." The air trembled. A gust of wind howled through the house, slamming doors, rattling windows. The lantern flickered violently, shadows twisting like smoke given form. Elena stumbled back, covering her face, and then silence. When she looked again, The crack in the wall was gone, perfectly sealed, as if it had never existed. Only the faint scent of ash lingered in the air. Elena stood trembling, her reflection faint in the window and behind her. For the briefest moment, a child's shape flickered in the glass, watching, waiting. As the night deepened, she whispered to herself, barely a breath, "I can't run any more." The house didn't answer, but somewhere in its hollow bones the whispers began again, softer now, closer, as though they were inside her. The walls of the mansion had begun to speak, and Elena Ramirez was listening. The night stretched long and sleepless. Elena sat against the wall with the cold lantern flickering beside her, the silence of the mansion pressing like a weight against her chest. Every breath she took felt stolen. Every creak of the floorboards above made her flinch. The walls were quiet now, but it wasn't peace. It was a pause, the stillness of something waiting to speak again. Her fingers trembled as she traced the words she'd written down on a scrap of paper hours earlier. "The fire chose you." The whisper still echoed in her skull, winding between her thoughts like smoke that refused to clear. By dawn she rose. The air was bitter, her breath fogging in the faint light. Mateo slept curled beneath a blanket, his small hand clutching the burned journal she'd tried to hide from him. Even in sleep, he wouldn't let it go. Elena stepped outside. The morning mist was thick, coating the trees like cobwebs. The mansion loomed behind her, black and sharp against the pale sky. Its windows reflected nothing, just emptiness. From a distance, it looked like a skeleton still clinging to life. She wrapped her arms around herself, whispering into the chill air, "Why me?" But the wind didn't answer. It only carried the faint scent of smoke from somewhere unseen. Later that morning, a knock broke the silence, sudden, sharp, startling. Elena jumped. It wasn't the wall this time, it was the front door. She hesitated, her pulse rising. No one ever came out this far. The nearest neighbor was miles away. Slowly, she approached and opened it. An older man stood on the porch, holding a leather satchel. He was tall, lean, with silver hair slicked neatly back, and eyes that seemed to study everything. His clothes were clean but old-fashioned, a dark coat, polished shoes that didn't belong on muddy ground. "Mrs. Ramirez?" he asked softly, his voice smooth, calm. "My name is Daniel Hargrove. I'm a historian from the county archives. I believe you recently purchased the Whitmore estate." Elena hesitated. "The burned mansion?" He smiled faintly. "Yes, though most people call it the Hearth House." The name sent a chill through her. "What do you want?" "I've spent years studying this property," he said, stepping carefully inside without waiting for her invitation. "Its history is complicated. When I heard someone had finally bought it, I wanted to see who was brave enough." She frowned. Brave enough for what? He ran his fingers along the soot streaked wall, his gaze sharp. "For the truth, the Whitmore family built this mansion over a century ago. Elias Whitmore, the youngest son, was said to have vanished the night of the fire. His mother went mad soon after, claiming she heard him whispering in the walls. Elena's breath hitched. "You said his name was Elias?" He nodded. "Yes, Elias Whitmore, the boy who supposedly found the family's fortune before the flames took him. His father was a mining baron, a cruel man. He hid gold somewhere on this property, but no one ever found it. Some say the fire started when Elias tried to reveal where it was hidden." Elena's skin prickled. The air between them felt heavy. "I found his journal," she whispered, half burned. Hargrove's eyes lit with interest. "You have it. May I see?" She hesitated, then shook her head. "It's dangerous. The house reacts to it." He studied her quietly, his expression unreadable. "The house reacts," she nodded, "when I read it. I hear things, voices, whispers from behind the walls." He smiled, but not kindly. You're not the first to say that. Before she could ask what he meant, a soft thud echoed through the room from inside the wall behind her. She froze. Hargrove turned his head slightly, listening. "Ah," he murmured, "it still breathes." Elena stepped back. "What do you mean? The Whitmore fire never truly went out," he said quietly. "They say the hearth was built with stone from the original mine stone that absorbed the heat, the greed, the deaths. It's as if the house itself remembers the fire and what it was protecting." Another sound this time, a hollow knocking, closer, louder. Matteo appeared at the top of the stairs, rubbing his eyes. "Mom, who's that?" "It's all right, baby," she said quickly, forcing calm. "Go back to your room." But he pointed toward the fireplace, Illy's back. Hargrove turned sharply. "Illy," Elena's voice was low. "Elias." Before another word could pass between them, the fireplace gave a deep, groaning creak. Dust poured from the mantel. The air trembled thick, electric. Then came the whisper, "He's lying." Elena and Hargrove both froze. The voice was a child's, faint but clear, threading through the cracks of the stone. Hargrove's eyes narrowed. "You heard that?" She nodded, trembling. He stepped closer to the hearth, placing a hand on the stone. "Elias," he said softly, "if you can hear me, show us." The silence that followed was sharp, fragile. Then a soft breath of heat escaped the chimney, brushing across their faces like the exhale of something alive. The flames inside the unlit hearth flickered once, though no wood burned there. Elena grabbed Matteo's hand. "Stop it. Don't talk to him." But Hargrove didn't move. His eyes gleamed with fascination. "Do you know what this means, Mrs. Ramirez? If the legend is true, if Elias really found where his father's gold was hidden, this house could be sitting on a fortune. You could be rich beyond imagining." Her voice trembled. "That gold killed them." He smiled faintly. "Gold doesn't kill, people do." She pulled Matteo close, shaking her head. "You need to leave." Hargrove stepped back, tipping his hat politely. "I will. But I'll be back tomorrow, and when I come, I'll bring what's left of the original plans for this house. Maybe then, you'll see what you're really sitting on." He left without another word. The front door closed softly behind him, and the silence that followed was almost unbearable. Elena turned toward the fireplace again. The air shimmered faintly around it, like heat rising from invisible flame. "Elias," she whispered, her voice breaking, "what are you trying to tell me?" For a long moment, nothing. Then, the faintest response, echoing from somewhere deep within the walls, "Don't trust him." Her breath caught. "Hargrove, he wants what my father wanted." A shiver ran through her. "What's behind the fire?" she asked softly. The whisper came again, but weaker now, fading like breath in winter air. "The truth and the death." Then silence. Elena sat there in the growing dusk, staring into the cold hearth, her reflection trembling in the soot. Dark stone. Outside, wind rattled the dead vines clinging to the house. She didn't know what frightened her more, the man who'd come knocking, or the boy who whispered through walls that shouldn't have a voice. As the night deepened, the first sound of rain began to fall slow, steady, like a heartbeat returning. Elena closed her eyes and whispered to herself, "I'm not leaving. Not until I know what you're protecting." The house seemed to hum in reply, not angry, not kind, but patient. Somewhere behind the stone and ash, faint gears began to turn, and deep inside the walls, where no living thing should have been, a child's laugh echoed once, and was gone. After the historian's visit, the house felt heavier, as if it had swallowed his words whole, and was now digesting them in silence. The rain hadn't stopped since he left. It drummed endlessly against the broken windows, rolling down the cracked glass like tears that the mansion could no longer shed. Elena barely slept. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw that faint shimmer of heat rising from the fireplace, the illusion of flame in a hearth gone cold. By morning, she stopped trying to rest. She simply sat at the table, staring at the burned journal spread before her like a map of secrets. Matteo stirred beneath his blanket, rubbing his eyes. "Mom," he whispered, "Illy says the man with the gray hair shouldn't come back." Elena turned sharply. "He told you that?" Matteo nodded, serious. "He said the man lies like his father did. He said the gold made them both sick." Her throat tightened. "Did he say anything else?" "He said the fire remembers the hands that built it." Elena looked toward the hearth, the words echoing in her mind. "The fire remembers." She rose slowly, walking toward it, her hand hovering above the cold stone. The surface was smooth beneath her palm, almost warm as though something pulsed beneath it. "The fire remembers," she murmured. A gust of wind rushed through the chimney, scattering a small pile of ash onto the floor. Among it, something metallic glinted faintly. Elena crouched down and brushed away the debris. It was a key small, blackened by soot, ornate with a pattern of vines curling around its handle. She stared at it, her heart thudding. She didn't know what it unlocked, but something deep inside her whispered that it was meant for her. By noon, the rain had thinned to a cold drizzle. The sound of dripping water echoed through the halls like a ticking clock. Elena searched the lower rooms, the collapsed pantry, the remnants of a wine cellar, the cracked marble hallway. Every door she found was already open, warped, or broken. But when she returned to the living room, something caught her eye. Behind the fireplace, just to the left of the mantel, was a seam in the wall almost invisible, hidden beneath soot and shadow. She ran her hand along it. The stone felt uneven, as if something had been sealed there. The key in her pocket seemed to grow heavier, pulling at her like a magnet. "Mom," Matteo's voice came softly from the doorway. "What are you doing?" Elena turned, smiling faintly to hide her unease. "Just cleaning, sweetheart." He stepped closer, his small feet leaving prints in the dust. "Illy says that's where it starts." Her pulse quickened. "Where what starts?" "The way down." Elena knelt, gripping his shoulders gently. "Matteo, look at me." "How do you know that?" He frowned, his eyes distant. "He told me in a dream. He said his father hid the gold where the fire couldn't reach, behind the wall that breathes." The air in the room shifted, growing heavier, denser. Elena felt her skin prickle as if static filled the air. She turned back to the wall. Beneath the soot, the faint outline of a small keyhole gleamed. Her hand trembled as she reached into her pocket and pulled out the blackened key. It fit perfectly. For a moment, she just stood there, heart racing. Then she turned it. A low rumble shook the hearth. Dust fell from the ceiling. The seam in the wall split open with a deep, grinding sound, stone moving against stone. A hidden door slowly revealed itself, its edges glowing faintly from heat trapped deep inside. Matteo stepped back, eyes wide. "Mom." Elena pressed a finger to her lips. "Stay behind me." The door opened just enough for her to see darkness beyond a narrow passage, walls of rough stone, the faint smell of metal and ash drifting out. She grabbed a lantern, lighting it with trembling hands, and lifted it toward the gap. The flame flickered violently, casting long, trembling shadows across the opening. "Illy," she whispered, "are you there?" No response. Just the faint sound of dripping water echoing from somewhere below. She pushed the wall further, the heavy stone groaning in protest, and stepped inside. The floor was uneven, carved directly into the earth. The air grew cooler, damper, filled with the scent of rust and old smoke. Every step echoed too loud. Every shadow seemed to breathe. "Mom?" Matteo whispered from behind her. "I don't like it. Stay close." They descended a few feet before the narrow path curved sharply left. The passage grew tighter, the ceiling pressing low enough that Elena had to duck. She lifted the lantern higher, and its light brushed across markings on the wall, the same looping symbols carved behind the plaster upstairs. She ran her fingers along them. The stone was rough, but the carvings were smooth, worn down by touch, as if someone had traced them countless times before. "Mom," Matteo whispered, "Illy says this is where they kept the fire." Her heart skipped. "What does that mean?" He shook his head. "He says it used to talk louder here." The air grew colder the deeper they went. The lantern flame flickered blue, throwing long shadows that seemed to move on their own. Then the passage widened into a small chamber, circular, lined with stone shelves. Most were empty, but one corner glowed faintly, reflecting light from something metallic, half buried in ash. Elena approached slowly, brushing the soot away with her sleeve. Gold. A single bar, heavy, unmarked, its surface etched with the same crest carved on the fireplace upstairs. She gasped softly, her voice trembling. "Oh my God!" Matteo stepped closer, staring at it. "Is that the treasure?" Elena didn't answer. Her fingers hovered over the bar, afraid to touch it. The air around it felt charged, alive, as though it were radiating more than heat. Then, behind them, the stone door groaned. They turned sharply. The passage was closing. "Mom!" Matteo cried, panic rising in his voice. Elena dropped the lantern, rushing toward the door. She slammed her hands against the stone, but it was already moving back into place. The grinding echoed through the chamber like thunder. She shoved, screamed, pounded, but it didn't stop. The opening shrank until only a sliver of light remained. Through it, she could see the faint glow of daylight on the other side. "Help!" she shouted. "Please!" But the house answered with silence. Then the whisper came again, soft and sorrowful. "The fire remembers who enters." The last crack of light vanished. Darkness swallowed them whole. Elena held Matteo tight, her breath shaking. Somewhere deep in the dark, beneath the earth, a faint hum began, a low vibration that pulsed through the stone, slow and steady, like a heartbeat. She lifted the fallen lantern. Miraculously, the flame still burned faint but alive. In its trembling light, words began to appear on the walls, glowing faintly in molten orange. She stepped closer, heart pounding. The symbols formed a phrase she could barely read, etched in some language older than she knew. But beneath it, someone had scratched new words, desperate, human, burned into the stone. "Only the rightful fire opens the gate." Elena stared at the words, her reflection flickering in the golden surface of the bar. "The fire." She whispered, "That's what it meant." Matteo looked up at her, fear shining in his eyes. "Mom, what if we can't get out?" Elena knelt, pulling him close. "We will, I promise." But even as she said it, the air grew hotter. The faint hum rose, vibrating the walls around them. The bar of gold began to glow faintly, not from light, but from heat, as if the metal remembered its birth in flame. The walls trembled once more, and somewhere deep beyond the stone, something ancient and mechanical began to move. As the sound grew louder, Elena realized with chilling clarity this wasn't just a vault. It was a gate, and the mansion above had only been its shell. The air inside the hidden chamber grew thick, pulsing with a strange rhythm, as though the mansion's buried heart had awakened. Elena clutched Matteo tightly, the faint lantern light trembling across their faces. The gold bar still glowed, pulsing faintly, casting reflections that rippled like firelight across the walls. Elena could feel the heat radiating from it, but it wasn't the dangerous kind of heat. It felt alive, humming through the air, vibrating against her skin. She reached out slowly, hand hovering above the bar, and the whisper returned not from the walls this time, but from somewhere deeper, vibrating through the stone floor itself. "The fire remembers its keeper." She drew back, heart racing, the phrase again, the same one that had haunted her since she'd first touched the hearth upstairs. Matteo pressed close to her side. "Mom, are we trapped?" She forced her voice to stay calm. "No, honey. We'll find a way out." But she didn't believe it. The walls around them groaned, faint cracks glowing softly with lines of molten light. Dust rained down from the ceiling. The hum intensified, deep and rhythmic, like something ancient and mechanical coming to life after years of sleep. Elena lifted the lantern higher, its flame flickering wildly in the vibrating air. There were carvings on every wall, now symbols layered over each other, circling the chamber like some forgotten language of fire. In the flicker of light, they seemed to move, the shadows between them shifting like eyes turning toward her. "Mom," Matteo whispered, clutching her arm. "Ellie's here." Her breath caught. "What?" He pointed toward the far wall. In the reflection of the lantern's glow, a faint figure shimmered, small, childlike, flickering in and out of the light like smoke taking form. The outline of a boy stood just beyond the edge of vision, eyes bright and hollow. Elena's throat went dry. "Elias!" The shape tilted its head. The voice that came wasn't heard, it was felt, vibrating through the air like a pulse. "You woke the gate." Elena swallowed hard. "What gate? What is this place?" The boy's figure flickered again, the edges of his form rippling like heat rising off stone. "My father hid his sin beneath the fire. He sealed it with the hands of those who died for it. They built the passage to guard what they could never spend." She looked around, her eyes catching on faint shapes she hadn't seen before. Chains, rusted and fused to the stone. Skeletons half collapsed into the walls, their bones scorched black. The air reeked of dust and old metal. Her hand trembled. "Dear God." Matteo buried his face in her sleeve. "Mom, let's go home." Elena forced herself to stand. "We're going to." But the whisper came again, softer, almost pleading. "You can't leave yet. The fire must know its name." The lantern's flame flared suddenly, stretching higher, almost white. The glow from the gold bar intensified, bathing the chamber in molten light. The carvings along the walls pulsed brighter, like veins of lava awakening. The hum grew into a roar. Elena shielded her eyes. "Stop it." "I don't understand." The boy's voice came again, distant and sorrowful. "The house remembers. It needs to be claimed." She turned, the light burning her vision, the air growing hotter with each passing second. She grabbed Matteo and pulled him toward the sealed stone door, pounding with both fists. "Let us out," she screamed. "Please." The sound that answered wasn't human, it was the grinding of stone, the creak of metal, the cry of a machine too old to live. The air rushed outward as if the chamber was inhaling, drawing breath. The lantern went out. Darkness. Then a flicker of red light began to glow from the cracks in wall. It traced the outline of the carvings, flowing like liquid flame until it reached the keyhole she had turned earlier. The faint hum became steady, rhythmic, almost like the beat of a drum. And then the voice of Elias, now faint, distant, like an echo through centuries. "Light it, Elena. Only the fire opens the way." She stared into the dark, trembling. "Light what?" The answer came in the faintest whisper. "The Hearthkeeper's flame, the one born of ruin." Elena looked at the lantern in her hands, cold, dark, useless. She reached into her pocket, pulling out the old lighter she'd found near the fireplace days ago, its metal casing scratched. Initials engraved faintly into the side. E.W., her pulse thundered. Elias Whitmore. The boy's voice was almost gone now. Only fire can unmake what fire began. Her hands shook as she flicked the lighter open. Once, twice, sparks flew, catching the faint smell of oil. The third flick caught. A small flame leapt to life, fragile, defiant, burning blue at the edges. She raised it toward the nearest wall. The flame wavered, then flared violently. Carvings ignited, spreading in a circle around the chamber. The light was blinding, the heat roaring, pressing against her skin like breath. The sealed stone door shuddered once, twice, then exploded outward with a deep, echoing boom. Dust and heat flooded the passageway beyond. Elena shielded Matteo with her body, coughing, gasping for air. When the haze cleared, the narrow tunnel beyond glowed faintly with light. The passage was open again. "Come on," she shouted, grabbing her son's hand. They ran through the twisting passage, the echo of their footsteps chasing them like ghosts. Behind them, the light of the chamber grew brighter and brighter until it blazed like a miniature sun. The sound of grinding gears followed them, a rumble so deep it shook the earth. They burst through the hidden door and stumbled into the living room, collapsing onto the sooty floorboards. Elena coughed, clutching Matteo to her chest. The fireplace behind them glowed faintly, not with flame, but with light seeping through the cracks, golden and warm. Matteo looked up, his voice shaking. "Mom, did we break it?" Elena stared at the hearth. The heat had faded, replaced by a low, steady hum, not angry, not vengeful, almost peaceful. "No," she whispered, "we woke it." The faint outline of Elias's face shimmered once more in the soot-stained stone, smiling not hauntingly, but with something close to relief. "Thank you." The whisper came, fading into the quiet. "Now the gate remembers its keeper." The light dimmed, the hum softened, and the house fell silent again, but not dead. It breathed differently now, steady and calm, like something at peace for the first time in a century. Elena held Matteo close, both of them trembling, their faces streaked with ash and tears. The rain outside had stopped. Through the broken window, the sky was streaked with the orange of dawn. For the first time since buying the mansion, she didn't feel afraid. But as she turned to look once more into the cold fireplace, she noticed something new. At the base of the hearth, just above the stone ledge, was carving she hadn't seen before, newly revealed by the heat. A line etched in elegant script, glowing faintly in the fading light. "The vault awaits its rightful flame." Elena's heart froze. She stared at it, realization washing over her like cold water. The chamber below hadn't been the vault. It was only the beginning, and somewhere deeper within the mansion, beyond stone, ash, and time, the true secret still waited. As the morning light touched the walls, Elena Ramirez whispered to herself, almost a vow, "I'm going to find it." The house creaked softly, almost like approval, and far below, deep beneath the mansion's ruined foundation, something ancient stirred once more, faint, rhythmic, and alive. The following morning dawned pale and brittle, as if even the sun was hesitant to touch the ruins of the Whitmore estate. Mist clung to the grass like a ghost reluctant to leave, curling through the broken fences and across the cracked stone path. Elena stood on the porch, her coffee cooling in her hand, her gaze locked on the chimney that now stood unnaturally still. The events of the night before replayed endlessly. In her mind, the glowing carvings, the sealed passage, the whisper of Elias's voice fading into the dark. She had seen things no sane person could explain, felt the earth itself pulse beneath her feet, heard the house breathe. And yet, when morning came, the mansion looked ordinary again, exhausted but silent, as though its walls were pretending nothing had happened. But she knew better. Down below, behind the stone and soot, the mansion wasn't resting. It was waiting. Inside, Matteo sat cross-legged on the floor, drawing again. His crayon scratched softly against the old wood, his face calm, almost too calm. When Elena leaned closer, her stomach tightened. He wasn't drawing the house anymore. He was drawing people, men in black coats, holding lanterns, their faces hidden. Behind them, a figure stood tall and grim, his eyes hollow, his hands red. "Elias says that's hit." "Father," Matteo murmured without looking up. Elena's breath hitched. "What does he say about him?" Matteo paused, his small hand hovering over the page. "He said his father wanted more than gold. He wanted to live forever. And the house told him no." A shiver crawled down her spine. The house told him. Matteo nodded, still coloring. "He said the fire talked to him, but he didn't listen. So it burned everyone who tried to take what wasn't theirs." The words hung heavy in the air. Elena looked around the dim, fractured room, her pulse quickening. "What else did he tell you?" Matteo frowned, thinking. He said the man with gray hair smells like the cellar. Her heart skipped. You mean Mr. Hargrove? Yeah, he said softly. Illy said he's not here to help us. He's here to wake the gold. Elena crouched, gripping Matteo's shoulders gently. Listen to me, sweetheart. If that man comes back, you stay away from him. You understand? Matteo nodded, his eyes wide but trusting. Elena forced a smile that didn't reach her eyes. Good. Now go get your jacket. We're going into town. But when she stepped outside, her stomach dropped. A car was already parked at the edge of the drive, a black sedan, old but polished, its surface glistening with dew. Mr. Hargrove stood beside it, leaning casually against the hood, as if he'd been waiting for hours. Elena, he greeted, his tone smooth, polite. You look tired. She straightened her jaw tight. You weren't invited back. He smiled faintly. I'm not here to intrude. I brought something you might want to see. He reached into his satchel and pulled out a rolled set of blueprints, old, yellowed, the edges frayed. The original plans for the Whitmore estate. Found them in the county archive basement. You wouldn't believe what they show. Elena crossed her arms. What do they show? He spread them across the hood of the car, his gloved fingers pinning the corners. The ink was faded, but the structure was unmistakable. The main floor, the upper rooms, the hidden passage behind the fireplace. And beneath it all, a large, circular chamber labeled Vault Access. Restricted. I told you, he said quietly. The gold wasn't lost in the fire. It was sealed. The vault still exists beneath this house. Elena's pulse quickened. I've already seen what's under there. There's no gold, just ashes and bones. He glanced at her sharply. You've been inside the passage. She regretted the words the moment they left her mouth. His expression shifted, polite curiosity giving way to hunger. So it's true, the gate opens. She stepped back. You need to leave, Mr. Hargrove. But he didn't move. You don't understand. This isn't just a treasure. Elias's father, Baron Whitmore, he wasn't just hoarding gold. He was performing something older, something forbidden. There are records, letters about rituals, symbols, a flame that never dies. The Baron called it the eternal inheritance. Elena shook her head. You're insane. He smiled. Perhaps, but you've seen the signs. You've heard the whispers. The fire speaks, doesn't it? She said nothing, her silence betraying her fear. Hargrove stepped closer. You think you own this place, but it's owned every soul that's touched it. Even yours now. You can't unlight what's been awakened. His voice softened, coaxing. Help me open the vault. We'll share what's inside. You and your son could have everything you've ever wanted. Elena's jaw clenched. My son wants peace. Not blood money. He sighed, almost pitying. Then you're a fool. Without another word, he rolled up the blueprints and slid them back into his satchel. When you change your mind, you know where to find me. He turned to leave, but before he reached the car, he stopped, his tone low and strange. The Baron died trying to control the fire. Don't make his mistake trying to bury it. The engine started, the sound echoing down the foggy road. Elena watched until his car disappeared beyond the trees. The wind whispered through the tall grass, carrying with it the faint scent of smoke, old smoke, deep and earthy, as though the fire below the mansion had taken its first breath. In decades, she went back inside, locking the door behind her. The house was still, almost listening again. She walked to the fireplace, running her hand across the warm stone. What did you do to them? She whispered, to him, to all of them. The whisper that came was not Elias's voice, it was older, deeper, like the sound of embers turning to ash. Greed burns longer than fire. She froze, staring at the cold hearth. What are you? No reply. Only the faint pulse beneath the floorboards, steady, rhythmic, alive. As she turned away, a soft creak echoed from above. She looked up. Matteo stood at the top of the stairs, pale, eyes wide. "Mom," he whispered, "someone's in my room." Her blood ran cold. She raced up the steps 2 at a time, her heart slamming in her chest. Matteo pointed to the corner of his room. The window was open, the curtain fluttering in the cold breeze. Elena stepped closer. On the floor, pressed into the dust, were footprints, large, fresh, muddy. Not hers, and lying on the bed was a single page, torn from an old ledger, the edges singed. In careful, antique handwriting were 5 words: "The Baron always keeps his debt." Elena's pulse thundered. She looked toward the window, then back to the hearth downstairs, now faintly glowing with that impossible golden light again. The curse wasn't just a legend. It was awake, and it had her name. As the wind howled through the broken glass, she held Matteo close, whispering into his hair, "We're leaving tomorrow. I promise." But even as she said it, the mansion seemed to sigh a low, rattling breath through the walls, like laughter muffled by flame. And deep below, something unseen shifted in the dark, whispering her name like a promise she could never escape. Elena didn't sleep that night. Every time she closed her eyes, the same thought circled her mind like smoke that refused to fade. "The Baron always keeps his debt." Those words pulsed through her veins louder than her heartbeat. Somewhere in the house, the wind moaned through the cracks, and it almost sounded like laughter. Matteo had finally drifted off, curled in her arms, his breath soft and even. She brushed the hair from his forehead, whispering a silent prayer to whatever force still listened in this cursed place. The rain outside had stopped, but the house hadn't grown quiet. It creaked and groaned like something turning in its sleep. Elena sat up, her eyes tracing the shadowed ceiling. The air felt thicker than usual, damp with the scent of smoke and iron. A faint golden shimmer flickered across the wall, the reflection of the fireplace downstairs. Except she hadn't lit a fire. Her chest tightened. She slid from the bed, careful not to wake Matteo, and moved toward the stairs. The glow grew stronger with each step, warm and alive, dancing faintly against the soot-darkened walls. When she reached the bottom, she froze. The hearth was burning, no wood, no flame, just golden light swirling within the empty fireplace, like molten air, twisting and bending, almost alive. It cast no smoke, no heat, just that strange, shimmering glow that pulsed with the rhythm of a living heartbeat. "Elias," she whispered, stepping closer. The light flickered, responding. "Are you doing this?" The answer came not from the fireplace, but from behind her, a whisper like breath on glass. "He's coming." Elena spun, her pulse pounding. "Who?" But the room was empty. A sharp knock at the door made her flinch. 3 slow, deliberate strikes that echoed through the hollow halls. She stared at the entrance, every instinct screaming not to answer. Then another knock. "Elena." A voice called softly. "It's Mr. Hargrove. Please, we need to talk." Her blood turned cold. She backed away, eyes flicking toward the window. "It's the middle of the night," she said, her voice trembling. "Go away." But he didn't. "Please. I found something. You deserve to know." The door handle turned. Elena's heart stopped. "Don't you dare." The latch clicked. Slowly, the door creaked open. Hargrove stood there in the dim light, his face half shadowed beneath his hat. His eyes gleamed not wild, but desperate. "You shouldn't be here," she whispered. He stepped inside, closing the door behind him. "I told you this house doesn't belong to you. It never did. You need to leave," she said, voice low and fierce. "You're scaring my son." He smiled faintly. "I'm not here to hurt him. I'm here to finish what my blood started." Elena froze. "Your blood?" He nodded slowly, removing his hat. "My great-grandfather was Baron Whitmore's younger brother. The curse didn't just consume this house, it followed the family. We've been searching for a way to end it for generations." She stared at him, disbelief and horror twisting inside her. "You're saying you're a Whitmore?" "I am," he said softly. And that vault beneath your floor isn't just holding gold. It's holding the Baron's final sin. You opened the first gate, now it's awake, and it will finish what he began unless we stop it. Elena shook her head. You're lying. You just want what's buried here. His eyes burned with conviction. Do you think I'd risk my life to steal something cursed? My family has been haunted by that fire for a century. Every generation loses something to its sanity, children, everything. I came here to end it. Elena's hands clenched into fists. How? He reached into his satchel and pulled out a small, charred journal older than the one she had found. Its cover was blackened, its pages crumbling at the edges. He laid it gently on the table. This belonged to the Baron himself. Elena didn't touch it. You expect me to believe that? Read, he urged. Reluctantly, she flipped the brittle cover open. The handwriting was jagged, frantic. The ink bled where fire had touched it. She read aloud in a trembling voice. The gold breathes beneath the earth. It hums with voices that will not die. I sealed it with fire, but the flame has memory. It knows me. It whispers in my sleep, promising more power beyond men, beyond time. But I have given it too much. The fire is not mine. It belongs to the Keeper now. She looked up, her throat tight. The Keeper. Hargrove's voice dropped to a whisper. The one chosen by the fire, the one it remembers. The realization hit her like ice. Me. He nodded. You lit the hearth. You opened the first gate. The mansion chose you. That's why it hasn't destroyed you yet. Elena backed away, shaking her head. No, I didn't choose this. The fire doesn't care about choice. He said softly. It binds to the soul it finds worthy or desperate enough to hear it. You awakened it, and now it's yours to command or to destroy. The light from the fireplace flared, flooding the room in golden shimmer. The walls trembled. A low groan echoed through the floorboards. Elena, Hargrove said, eyes fixed on the glow. If we don't seal it again, it will consume us both. How, she cried, how do we seal something that's alive? He reached into his coat and pulled out a small metal flask engraved with the Whitmore crest. The Baron's ashes, he said, they're the key. His remains were mixed with the first gold that was poured into the vault. The curse began with him, and it must end with him. Elena stared at the flask, the weight of it visible even from where she stood. You brought his ashes here. I had to. It's the only way. The fire must take him back. Before she could respond, the flames in the hearth exploded upward, a column of gold and white light roaring toward the ceiling. Matteo's scream pierced the air from upstairs. Matteo! Elena shouted, racing for the stairs. The steps shook beneath her as she climbed. Smoke, hot and metallic, filled the hall. Matteo, she screamed again, in here. His voice cried. She burst into his room and stopped cold. The golden light was seeping through the cracks in the floorboards, spreading like liquid sun. Matteo stood frozen, staring at it, tears on his cheeks. Mom, he whispered, it's calling me. Elena lunged, grabbing him, pulling him back. Don't look at it. Don't listen. Hargrove appeared in the doorway, the flask clutched in his hand. Elena, listen to me, the vault's waking. You have to take him outside. But the golden light flared brighter, swallowing the walls, the floor, everything. The air itself seemed to burn. Give me the ashes, she shouted over the roar. Hargrove's eyes gleamed with something wild. No. I can still control it. He stepped toward the spreading light, holding the flask high. I am a Whitmore. The fire is mine. The floor split open. A rush of blinding heat filled the room. Hargrove's scream tore through the air, raw, human, final. His body vanished in the light, leaving only the flask clattering to the floor. Elena grabbed it, clutching Matteo tight, and ran. The walls groaned, cracking as the house shuddered from within. They reached the front door just as the air behind them imploded, sucking wind and ash into the blazing heart of the mansion. She stumbled out into the rain, soaked yard, falling to her knees, gasping for air. Matteo clung to her, crying into her shoulder. Behind them, the mansion pulsed with golden light, not flame, but something deeper, something alive. Elena opened her hand, staring at the flask. The metal was searing hot, glowing faintly. Through the thin cracks in the lid, she saw a glint of ash and gold swirling inside a storm trapped in metal. The curse hadn't ended, it had simply changed its master. As thunder rumbled in the distance, she whispered into the storm, "Then I'll finish what you started." The mansion exhaled one last breath of light through its chimney, then fell silent, a giant heart gone still, waiting for its next command. And though the rain began to fall again, washing soot from her hands, the ashes inside the flask burned hotter, pulsing to the rhythm of her own heartbeat. The storm passed before dawn, leaving behind a heavy silence, the kind that comes after the world remembers what it's capable of destroying. Smoke clung to the air, drifting in low waves around the mansion's burned bones. Elena sat in the wet grass, drenched, trembling, the small metal flask pressed against her palm like a wound she couldn't close. Matteo slept in her lap, his head against her chest, his small breath steady despite everything. She brushed a strand of hair from his face, her hand shaking. The mansion behind them stood wounded but not fallen, its charred frame glowing faintly in the grey light, the chimney still exhaling whispers of gold through its cracks. It should have been over. Hargrove should have been the last victim of the Baron's curse. But as Elena stared at the faint glow pulsing from the fireplace inside, she knew the fire wasn't done with her. Not yet. The flask burned faintly in her grip, pulsing with the rhythm of her heartbeat. Inside, something moved, ash swirling, faint sparks flickering within it like dying embers refusing to fade. She wanted to throw it as far as she could, to bury it deep where no one would ever find it. But every time she thought of doing so, a voice inside her whispered, "Finish it." The same voice that had guided her through the vault, through darkness, through the secrets this cursed house refused to let die. By mid-morning, Matteo stirred. "Mom." His voice was small, raw from crying. She forced a soft smile. "Hey, baby, you okay?" He nodded weakly. "The man, the one with grey hair, he's gone, isn't he?" Elena swallowed hard. "Yes, he's gone." He looked at the flask in her hand, then back at the mansion. "But the house isn't." She followed his gaze. The chimney still glowed faintly, breathing out a thin ribbon of golden smoke that rose into the mist and vanished. "No," she whispered, "it isn't." They went inside together. The floorboards creaked beneath their steps, and the air felt heavier than before, warm, like breath on the back of her neck. The glow from the hearth was softer now, steady, alive. Elena set the flask on the mantel, her reflection flickering in its metal surface. She spoke softly into the quiet. "What do you want from me?" The fire answered not with words, but with movement. The golden light within the hearth twisted, shaping itself into faint patterned symbols she'd seen before, ancient and looping. She recognized them now, not as letters, but as instructions. "Light the fire with what remains." Her gaze drifted to the flask again. "You can't be serious," she whispered. Matteo tugged her sleeve. "Illy says it's the only way." She turned sharply. "He's here." He nodded, calm. "He says the house won't rest until the fire takes back what it lost." Elena stared into the hearth. The air shimmered, the walls faintly vibrating with a low hum that matched the pulse in her hands. She unscrewed the flask slowly. The lid came off with a hiss and heat burst from it, soft and golden, like a breath long held. Inside, the ashes swirled in a gentle current of light. For a moment she hesitated, then she whispered, "Please, let this end." She tipped the flask. The ashes fell into the hearth, a slow cascade of grey and gold dust sinking into the faintly glowing embers. For an instant, nothing happened. The silence deepened, stretching long and unbearable. Then the air exploded with light. Flames erupted, but they weren't red or orange, they were gold and white, twisting in a perfect spiral that reached toward the ceiling. The sound was not a crackle, but a low hum, deep and harmonious, vibrating through every beam and brick of the mansion. The carvings on the hearth lit up once more, brighter than ever before, the symbol racing like fire along the walls. Matteo clung to her, his face buried in her side. Elena shielded him, watching through the glare. The light was too bright to bear, yet it didn't burn. It wrapped around them like warmth, like something recognizing them, marking them as its own. And then, within the roaring light, she saw him, Elias. His form shimmered within the flame, not as a ghost this time, but whole, human, peaceful. The boy who had once been trapped behind stone now stood in the center of the fire, his small hands outstretched toward her. "Thank you," he whispered. His voice was clear now, free of the echo, gentle as wind. "You gave it back what it lost." Tears welled in Elena's eyes. The fire. "It's not evil, is it?" He shook his head. "It remembers. It burns greed, not love." She stepped closer, her heart aching. "What happens now?" He smiled faintly. "Now it sleeps, and so can we." The flames began to fade, softening, folding inward until the hearth was nothing but glowing embers. Elias's form flickered once, then dissolved into sparks that floated upward and vanished. Silence followed, deep, absolute, but peaceful. The golden light dimmed until only the faint crackle of dying coals remained. Matteo looked up, his eyes wide. "Is it over?" Elena exhaled shakily. "I think so." The mansion felt lighter, the air no longer pressed down on her chest. The faint hum beneath the floor was gone, replaced by the quiet rhythm of rain dripping from the eaves. She sank to her knees before the hearth, exhaustion flooding her bones. For the first time since she had stepped into this house she wasn't afraid. But as the morning light crept across the floor, glinting against the mantel, she noticed something, a small brass key resting where the flask had been. She picked it up. It was warm, engraved with the same crest as before. Matteo watched her. "What's it for?" She turned the key in her hand. "I don't know," she said softly, "but I think the house does." When she looked up again, her reflection in the blackened stone didn't look the same. Her face was streaked with soot, her eyes weary, but beneath it there was something else, a calm, fierce light. She stood, holding the key tightly, and looked once more at the sleeping hearth. "I'm not running anymore," she whispered. "Whatever this house is keeping, it ends with me." Outside, the sky began to clear, the clouds thinning to reveal a pale strip of sunlight breaking through the mist. It reached across the ruins and fell through the broken window, landing directly on the fireplace. The gold shimmered faintly beneath it, quiet now, but alive, as if waiting for its final chapter. Elena turned toward the stairway, the key clutched tight in her hand. She didn't see the faint etching appearing behind her, forming slowly along the stone of the hearth, glowing just enough to be seen before fading again. The gate is open. The heart remains. And though the house stood silent, somewhere deep below the floorboards, something stirred again, not in anger, not in curse, but in rebirth. The fire had been reborn, and this time it belonged to her. Evening fell slow and heavy, painting the world in copper light. The rain had stopped, but the air still carried the scent of smoke and wet earth. Elena stood at the window, staring out over the dark field that stretched beyond the ruins of the estate. The mansion loomed behind her, no longer burning, no longer whispering, just breathing quietly, like a creature finally at rest. But rest, she knew, was never the same as peace. The brass key sat on the table beside her. Its surface glimmered faintly, catching the dim light from the fading sky. The engraving, the Whitmore crest, surrounded by curling vines, looked different now. The metal pulsed softly beneath her fingertips, as if responding to her heartbeat. Matteo sat nearby, wrapping himself in a blanket, his face pale but calm. He'd been silent for hours, his little mind carrying far more than a child ever should. When he finally spoke, his voice was quiet, almost reverent. Ili said, "The fire sleeps now." "But not forever." Elena turned, her heart twisting. "What do you mean?" He met her gaze. "He said there's something under the floor, something that has to be seen before it forgets." Her breath caught. He said that. Matteo nodded. He said the fire showed him where it begins. Elena looked down at the key again. Its faint glow pulsed once, slow and sure like a summons. The mansion had gone still, but the pull inside her had not. The same force that made her press bid that night, the same voice that made her open the wall, walk into darkness, and awaken what had slept for a century now whispered again, "Go below." She should have been afraid, but she wasn't. Something had changed within her, something fierce and unyielding. Fear had burned away, leaving only resolve. She turned to Matteo, kneeling so their eyes met. "You stay here, okay? No matter what happens, don't follow me." He shook his head, clutching her hand. "I don't want you to go alone." She smiled softly. "I won't be alone." The boy hesitated, then nodded, as if understanding something she didn't need to say. Elena took the lantern and the key, her steps echoing softly as she approached the fireplace once more. The air in front of it shimmered faintly, like heat rising from invisible flame. She crouched down, finding the narrow seam in the stone, the same one that had once sealed the passage. The key slid in easily this time. The lock turned with a smooth click, and the wall responded like a heartbeat. The faint hum returned, the stones trembling slightly before shifting apart. The secret passage opened again, breathing out a faint gust of warm air that carried the scent of earth and metal. She lit the lantern and descended. The stairway spiraled down, narrow and uneven. The deeper she went, the more the air thickened, heavy with memory. The walls glowed faintly now, the same golden veins pulsing softly like living roots under stone. Her footsteps echoed one, then another, until the passage opened into the chamber below. It looked different now. The floor had cracked. The walls gleamed with golden threads of molten light. The ashes that had once covered everything were gone, replaced by symbols carved into the ground itself, glowing softly, breathing with life. At the center of the chamber was something new, a circular stone platform that hadn't been there before, and above it, hovering just a few inches from the ground, a single shard of gold floated spinning slowly, surrounded by faint ribbons of light. Elena stepped forward cautiously, the lantern trembling in her hand. The air vibrated around her like a heartbeat too close to the skin. As she approached, the shard pulsed brighter. The sound that followed wasn't a whisper, it was a voice, low and resonant, echoing through the stone. "You returned the ashes, but the fire remembers what it was promised." Her breath quickened. "Who are you?" The voice shifted, layered, ancient yet familiar. "I am what he woke and what you freed. I am the hunger of men and the mercy of flame. I am the debt left unpaid." Elena's throat tightened. "You're the curse." The light pulsed in response. "Names don't bind me, only choices do." She felt the warmth of the key burning in her hand. The engraving glowed, the vines curling tighter around the crest. The voice continued, softer now, almost kind. "The Baron's gold was forged from suffering. Souls bound to greed, turned to metal, buried beneath the fire. You carry the last of that light. What will you do with it?" Elena stared at the shard. The glow illuminated her face, reflecting tears she didn't realize were falling. "I don't want the gold. I don't want power. I just want to be free." The light flickered, almost like laughter. "Freedom costs the same as greed everything." Her pulse raced. The heat grew stronger. The shard began to hum faster, spinning, its glow expanding. The entire chamber trembled. She shouted over the sound, "What do you want from me? To finish what you began." The floor split open around the platform. Golden light poured upward like molten sun, flooding the chamber. Elena shielded her eyes, gripping the key tightly. Then she understood. The key wasn't meant to unlock gold. It was meant to unlock release. She stepped onto the platform, the light wrapping around her like a living flame. The shard of gold floated closer, until it hovered just before her chest, pulsing with light that mirrored her heartbeat. Mateo's voice echoed faintly from above. "Mom." She turned toward the sound, her eyes glistening. "Stay there, baby. I'm okay." The voice of the fire deepened, reverberating through the walls. "Give it back to the earth. Burn the hunger from its heart." Elena raised the key. It blazed in her hand, the vines glowing bright gold before melting into light that flowed into the shard. The sound grew louder, the air vibrating like thunder. The shard exploded into brilliance, not with violence, but with grace. It expanded, light blooming outward, flooding the chamber with warmth so pure it didn't hurt. The heat washed through her, through the stone, through every hidden room of the mansion above. The house groaned, sighed, and finally exhaled. When the light faded, Elena was on her knees. The air was cool, still, clean. The golden veins in the walls had dimmed, their glow reduced to faint traces, like veins of amber in old rock. She looked around. The shard was gone, so was the platform. All that remained was the key, now dull and cold, resting in her palm. Elena rose slowly, her breath trembling. She turned and made her way back through the tunnel, up the stairs, and into the living room. Mateo ran to her, tears in his eyes. "Mom." She held him tight, burying her face in his hair. "It's over," she whispered. "It's really over." He pulled back, smiling through the tears. "The house feels different." She looked around. The walls no longer groaned. The air was lighter, the shadows softer. Even the scent of smoke was gone. For the first time since stepping into this cursed place, it felt like a home. On the mantel, where the flask had once sat, a faint ember glowed. A single spark, no bigger than a heartbeat. Elena smiled faintly. "You can rest now," she whispered to it. "All of you." The ember pulsed once warm, content, and went out. Outside, the first light of dawn touched the horizon, gilding the broken windows in gold. The wind that swept through the trees carried no whispers this time, only the quiet sigh of peace. Elena turned to Mateo. "Come on," she said softly. "Let's start rebuilding." He smiled, clutching her hand. "From the ashes," she nodded, "always from the ashes." And as they stepped out into the morning, the mansion behind them settled into silence, not the silence of the dead, but the calm of something finally forgiven. Deep beneath the floor, the faint hum of warmth remained, not a curse, not a warning, but a heartbeat, the reborn fire sleeping within its keeper's walls. As sunlight spilled across the ruins, the house, once the grave of greed, became the womb of something new. The fire had remembered. Now it could finally forget. The mansion had been silent for 3 days. No whispers, no heat pulsing beneath the floorboards. Only the occasional sigh of wind through the shattered windows, brushing against the hollow bones of the house like a ghost learning how to breathe again. Elena told herself it was peace, that the curse had finally died. But peace, she was beginning to learn, had its own kind of unease. She sat at the kitchen table, a hammer and notebook beside her, planning repairs she could barely afford. Sunlight streamed through the cracked panes, catching dust in golden threads. The air smelled of damp wood and old smoke. Everything seemed normal, too normal. Every sound, the scrape of her chair, the rustle of Mateo's crayon on paper, felt too loud against the stillness. The house had been alive for so long, its silence now felt like an empty chest after a heartbeat stops. Mateo sat on the floor, drawing again. His sketches had changed, no more flames or ghostly faces. He drew flowers now, bright and sprawling across the page. But every few lines his crayon paused mid-stroke, as if waiting for something unseen to move. "Mom," he said suddenly, "the walls are quiet." Elena smiled faintly. "That's a good thing, baby. It means the house is resting." He nodded slowly, not convinced. "Ellie says it's dreaming." Her smile faltered. "He's still talking to you, Matteo shrugged. Only sometimes. He says the fire's sleeping, but it remembers the dark. Elena's pulse quickened. The dark? He says that's where the gold lives. The hammer slipped from her hand, clattering against the table. She stared at him, her voice a whisper. What do you mean? He says the house showed you the fire, but not the tomb. A chill spread through her chest. The tomb? Matteo looked down at his drawing again. His small hand moved slowly, tracing the outline of stairs descending beneath a cracked floor. He says the gold isn't gone. It's waiting for the one who freed it. Elena stood abruptly, the chair scraping across the floor. Matteo, listen to me, you mustn't talk to him anymore. Do you understand? He frowned. But he's not bad, Mom. He's just scared. Her voice softened, trembling. Then we'll let him rest, like the fire. No more talking to him, okay? He nodded, but his eyes didn't meet hers. The rest of the day passed in uneasy quiet. Elena tried to work cleaning, patching holes, clearing debris, but the air felt heavier with every passing hour. Each time she passed the fireplace, she swore she could hear a faint hum, like the heartbeat of something sleeping beneath the floor. By sunset, exhaustion forced her to stop. She sat before the hearth, the last light of day bleeding through the windows. The stone looked different now, darker, almost charred again. She ran her fingers across it, whispering to herself, "You're done. You hear me? You're done." The stone was cold beneath her palm. Then a faint click. She froze. The sound had come from within the hearth, deep behind the wall. It wasn't the creak of old stone or the pop of cooling metal, it was deliberate, mechanical. Slowly she leaned forward. The floor beneath her knees was warm. "Mom," Matteo's small voice echoed from behind her. She turned. "Go upstairs, honey." But now. He hesitated, then obeyed, his small footsteps creaking up the stairs. Elena turned back to the hearth. The faint glow she'd banished days ago had returned, not gold this time, but something darker, red, faint and pulsing like light seen through skin. Her breath caught. No. The hum grew louder, the air thickened. The dust on the floor began to swirl, caught in an unseen wind that came from inside the fireplace itself. The old carvings along the mantel, the vines, the crest, the faint words began to shimmer again, glowing faintly in the growing darkness. She reached out to touch them, and the stone shifted beneath her hand. The hearth groaned, deep and resonant, the same sound it had made when she'd first unlocked the hidden passage weeks ago. Only this time it didn't open upward. The sound came from below. The floor in front of the fireplace cracked, splitting down the center. Dust rose in clouds. Beneath the splintered boards, she saw it a stair, well, she hadn't known existed, descending into pitch black earth. Elena stumbled back, her heartbeat deafening in her ears. The air pouring from the gap was warm and thick, smelling faintly of sulfur and gold, a scent both intoxicating and wrong. The whisper came again. "The fire burns above, but the gold sleeps below." "Elias," she whispered. No answer, only the steady hum rising from the open stairwell, deep and ancient, like a song sung by the dead. She stared into the darkness, torn between terror and something she hated herself for, curiosity. The same pull that had brought her here in the first place. Behind her, Matteo's small voice came again, trembling this time. "Mom, I think the house woke up again." The words hung in the air, heavy as smoke. Elena turned toward him slowly. His eyes were wide, reflecting the faint red glow from the stairwell. Behind him, the hallway lights flickered on, off, on again before dying completely. The only light left came from the opening in the floor. "Elias said the dark remembers," Matteo whispered. "He said it's calling you." Elena's chest tightened. She grabbed his hand. "We're leaving." They turned toward the door, but as she reached for the handle, a deep, thunderous groan rolled through the house. The walls trembled. The floor shifted beneath their feet. The stairwell behind them glowed brighter, flooding the room with pulsing red light. Matteo screamed. The front door slammed shut on its own, the sound echoing like a gunshot. Elena's voice broke. "Please, stop." The mansion answered with a sound like breath drawn through burning coals. Then silence, thick, suffocating silence. The red glow dimmed, fading to a faint ember deep below the earth. The hum quieted to nothing. The crack in the floor sealed itself again, the boards fitting together as if they had never split. Elena stood frozen, holding her son close, their faces streaked with sweat and dust. "Mom," Matteo whispered, "it didn't want us to leave." She looked down at him, at the fear, at the knowing in his eyes, and she couldn't bring herself to lie. "No," she whispered, "it didn't." Outside, lightning flashed across the horizon, casting the mansion's shadow long across the field. And for a moment, in that brief white light, Elena thought she saw figures standing near the gate, outlines of men, tall and still, their eyes faintly glowing in the rain. When the darkness returned, they were gone. The fire had slept, but the gold, the Baron's gold, was still awake, and beneath the quiet floorboards something began to breathe again. The storm returned that night, not with thunder, but with silence so deep it swallowed every sound. Elena sat on the floor beside Matteo's bed, holding his hand while his breathing steadied in restless sleep. Outside, the wind moved through the dead trees like the whisper of something searching. Every window in the mansion rattled softly, a warning she couldn't ignore. She stared at the hearth across the room. It sat cold, dark, innocent, pretending nothing had happened. But she knew better. The floor still carried heat in its bones. Beneath it, something ancient stirred in slow, deliberate rhythm. The words Matteo had spoken earlier wouldn't leave her mind. The house showed you the fire, but not the tomb. The tomb, the gold, the darkness beneath. She rose quietly, trying not to wake him. The flashlight in her hand cast thin ribbons of light across the walls, catching the faint gleam of soot that never seemed to fade. The floorboards beneath the hearth creaked under her steps, hollow, not solid wood, but a cover. She knelt, pressing her palm to the floor. The same warmth pulsed beneath it, faint but alive. "I freed your fire," she whispered into the silence. "What else do you want from me?" No answer, only a faint vibration beneath her hand, like breath exhaled through stone. Her throat tightened. "If there's more, then show me." For a heartbeat, nothing happened. Then came the sound, soft, steady, growing louder, the same rhythmic clicking she had heard earlier. Elena stepped back. The floorboards shifted again, this time slower, more deliberate. The seams in the wood began to glow faintly, outlining the same circular pattern she had seen below the mansion. "Mom," Matteo's voice came, groggy and frightened. She turned quickly. "Stay in bed, baby." But he was already sitting up, clutching his bear, eyes wide. "It's opening again, isn't it?" The boards groaned, pulling apart like the jaws of something waking. The red light returned, spilling upward in faint, trembling waves. Elena's flashlight flickered. The air thickened with the scent of hot metal, old, burning, wrong. "Stay behind me," she said, voice low and shaking. The stairwell yawned open once more, the same passage as before, but deeper now, broader, the light below glowing richer, molten gold mixed with blood, red hues. It wasn't the color of treasure. It was the color of greed made flesh. The whisper came not from the air, but from everywhere at once. "You saw the fire's mercy. Now see the gold's truth." Elena's heart pounded. "I don't want your gold. I want this to end. You lit the hearth." The voice said, calm, echoing through the bones of the house. "You freed what burned, but you've yet to face what was buried." The air pulsed with heat. The edges of the stairwell shimmered, Beneath the red glow, she could see shapes moving, flickers of shadows caught in liquid light. Bodies, not whole but skeletal, fused into the gold like insects trapped in amber. Dozens of them, men, women, their bones twisted, their hands still reaching upward as though clawing toward escape. Elena staggered back, covering her mouth. Dear God! The voice grew softer, almost mournful. They built the vault. They sealed the Baron's sin. He promised them freedom, and gave them fire instead. Elena felt the tears burn behind her eyes. He killed them. He fed them to the gold. The light flared, revealing the truth she hadn't wanted to see. The vault wasn't a room. It was a grave, a tomb built not to hide treasure, but to imprison it. Matteo's small voice trembled behind her. Mom, they're moving. She turned sharply. The skeletal remains below were shifting, their golden cages cracking. Faint tendrils of molten metal began to stretch, sliding up the walls like liquid veins. The gold wasn't resting, it was rising. Elena grabbed Matteo, pulling him toward the door. Run! They bolted down the hall, the floor trembling beneath their feet. Behind them, the light surged upward, bursting through the cracks in the floorboards, chasing them in waves of molten glow. The mansion moaned deep, guttural, as though it were alive again, its hunger reawakened. Elena shoved Matteo into the next room, slamming the door behind them. The walls glowed faintly, the golden veins crawling through the plaster like roots seeking air. Mom, Matteo cried, clutching her arm. What's happening? She forced herself to look at him, his terrified face, his trembling hands, and felt something shift inside her. She'd had enough of running. Enough of fear, enough of the mansion using them as pawns in a game built on blood and greed. It's not the house, she whispered, almost to herself. It's what's underneath. It's still trying to own us. The whisper answered from the other side of the door. You freed the keeper, but you did not end the curse. Elena grabbed the lantern from the shelf, lighting it with a trembling hand. Then tell me how. The voice came softer this time, Elias's voice, faint and sorrowful. The fire must touch what it never could. Only flame can burn the greed away. She turned toward the glow seeping through the cracks in the floor. The gold, she whispered, it wants to be burned. Matteo's eyes widened. But there's too much, I know. She took a deep breath, grabbed a small can of kerosene from the corner, and looked toward the hall. The mansion's hum was louder now, a pulse, steady and hungry. Elias, she whispered, if you can hear me, help me finish this. The lantern flame flickered once, twice, and steadied, burning brighter. She kicked the door open. The hallway beyond was alive, the walls shimmering with liquid gold crawling upward, forming faces, hands, screams frozen mid-rise, the very essence of the Baron's sin. Elena held the lantern high, her voice breaking through the roar. You took lives for your greed, and now you'll burn for it. She hurled the lantern toward the spreading gold. It shattered. Flame exploded outward, catching the crawling metal, devouring it with light. The heat was unbearable, but it was pure, not the sickly gold of greed, but the fierce white gold of truth. The screams came then not human, but echoes of souls freed from their prisons, wailing upward through the floors, the walls, the chimney. The mansion itself howled, the sound tearing through the night like a dying beast. Elena clutched Matteo to her chest, shielding him as the fire spread, racing down into the stairwell, consuming the vault below. The last voice she heard before the flames reached the foundation was not Elias's, it was the Baron's. You cannot burn what is eternal. Elena shouted back, her voice steady, fierce. Then it dies with me, the fire answered. The explosion that followed wasn't violent. It was magnificent, a bloom of golden light that burst through every window, every crack, every shattered piece of glass, flooding the field outside. For a brief, impossible moment, The mansion stood reborn in flame pure, radiant, alive before collapsing inward on itself, swallowed by its own creation. When the smoke cleared, only the foundation remained blackened stone, wet with rain and silence that felt like mercy. Elena lay in the grass, coughing, holding Matteo close. He stirred, his face streaked with ash. "Mom, is it over?" She looked at the ruins, where faint sparks still glowed between the stones like stars dying in the dark. "Yes," she whispered, "it's over." But as the wind shifted, she saw it, a faint glint buried beneath the rubble, gold, untouched, unburned, waiting. Her eyes met Matteo's. "Come on," she whispered, "we're leaving now." As they walked away, the first light of dawn touched the ruins, glinting against the buried gold. It shimmered faintly, pulsing once, as if remembering the shape of the fire that tried to destroy it. The Baron's curse had ended. But greed never dies easily, and beneath the ashes, the gilded tomb slept once more, dreaming of those who would someday come to dig it open again. The ruins still smoked when the strangers arrived. Elena had spent the morning trying to convince herself it was over, that she and Matteo could finally leave this cursed land and start again. But fate, it seemed, had other plans. They'd camped just beyond the estate line, on a small patch of grass near the rusted iron gate. The mansion lay behind them, half collapsed, the last of its embers fading into the grey daylight. Matteo sat beside her, his knees pulled to his chest, wrapped in the only blanket that hadn't burned. He hadn't said much since the fire. Every now and then he'd glance back toward the ruins, as though expecting the house to rise again from its ashes. Elena didn't tell him she feared the same thing. By noon, the wind shifted. The scent of wet earth and smoke gave way to something colder: oil, leather, and gasoline. Elena's stomach dropped before she even heard the sound. Engines. Two black SUVs rolled down the dirt road, tires crushing gravel, their windows tinted black against the afternoon light. They didn't stop until they reached the gate. Matteo looked up. "Mom," Elena's voice was tight. "Stay behind me." The vehicles stopped, the doors opened. 6 men stepped out, all in dark coats, their boots sinking into the mud, and from the last car emerged a 7th figure, a woman this time. Tall, sharp, featured, her grey hair tied back, her expression hard enough to cut glass. She surveyed the smouldering ruins without emotion. "So it's true," she murmured. "The house is gone." Elena stood. "Who are you?" The woman's gaze flicked toward her, assessing. "My name is Victoria Whitmore." Elena's pulse froze. "Whitmore?" The woman nodded slowly. "Daniel Hargrove was my cousin, or what remained of him." Elena felt the blood drain from her face. "He's dead." "Yes," Victoria said evenly, "and you're going to tell me how." Elena's hand tightened on Matteo's shoulder. He tried to steal what wasn't his. The house took him. Victoria's cold eyes narrowed. "The house doesn't take. It protects. That's what it was built to do." "I don't know what you're talking about," Elena said quickly. "We've been through hell here. My son and I barely made it out alive." Victoria stepped closer, her boots leaving deep prints in the wet earth. "You awakened it, didn't you?" Elena's breath hitched. "I can see it in your eyes." Victoria continued. "You've heard it, the fire's voice." Elena forced herself not to flinch. "It's gone. Whatever it was, it's over." Victoria's lips curved in something that wasn't quite a smile. "No, fire doesn't die, it hides, and what you burned was only the surface." She turned toward the ruins, gesturing to her men. "Search everything. The vault should still be beneath the south wing." Elena's chest tightened. "There's nothing left down there." Victoria didn't look back. "Then you won't mind if we check." The men moved past her without hesitation, pulling equipment from the vehicle's crowbars, scanners, heavy flashlights. Their boots crunched over ash and charred stone as they entered the remains of the house. Elena's heart raced. She grabbed Mateo's hand. "We have to go." But before she could take a step, one of the men blocked their path, tall, expressionless, hand resting casually on the gun holstered at his hip. Victoria turned back, her eyes gleaming faintly in the fading light. "You're not going anywhere, Mrs. Ramirez. If you've been inside that vault, then you know things that belong to my family." Elena's voice trembled. "Your family buried people alive down there. You don't own anything but their ghosts." Victoria's smile didn't falter. "Ghosts are a small price for gold that can't be burned." The words struck her like ice. "You don't understand. The gold isn't a treasure, it's a curse." Victoria's tone was soft but cutting. "A curse is just power you don't know how to use." Elena stepped forward, shaking. "That's exactly what your cousin thought. And now he's ash." Something flickered behind Victoria's eyes, not anger, but hunger. "Then I'll make sure his death wasn't in vain." She turned to her men. "Dig until you find the vault entrance. It'll be under the Fireplace foundation. The woman and her son stay here." Elena lunged forward. "No, you don't understand what you're—" The man beside her shoved her back roughly. Mateo cried out. "Mom, don't touch him," she screamed, grabbing her son, pulling him close. Victoria tilted her head. "You should be grateful, Mrs. Ramirez. You've proven the gate still works, and for that you'll be remembered." She walked toward the ruins, her figure swallowed by smoke and shadow. Elena turned to Mateo, her mind racing. They couldn't stay. They couldn't let those people touch what was buried beneath that ground. The fire was gone, yes, but the gold was still alive, and she had seen what happened when greed called its name. "Listen to me," she whispered urgently. "We're going to run, okay, through the woods, down the old road. Don't stop until you see the town lights." Mateo's eyes widened. "What about you? I'll be right behind you," she promised. She pressed the small brass key, the same one she'd used to open the passage, into his palm. "If something happens to me, you keep this. Don't ever let anyone touch it. Ever." He nodded, tears filling his eyes. "Mom, go," she whispered. He turned and ran, disappearing into the tall grass beyond the gate. Elena spun back toward the ruins. The men were shouting now, their flashlights sweeping through smoke and dust. She moved quietly along the perimeter of the collapsed walls, crouching low behind a pile of charred beams. A deep rumble rose from below the foundation, faint at first, then louder. The ground itself seemed to vibrate. The men stopped. One of them called out, "Ma'am, there's something down here." Victoria turned sharply. "What is it?" "I think—" The man's voice broke off. "Oh my God!" A blinding golden light burst upward from the hole they dug, engulfing them in brilliance. Their screams followed, raw, terrified, human. The sound clawed through the air as the light consumed everything around it. Elena shielded her face, the heat washing over her like a tidal wave. Victoria staggered back, her face pale in the glow. "The vault," she whispered, "it's alive." The earth split beneath them. From the molten light, shapes began to rise, outlines of bodies, forged in gold, their faces frozen in agony. The Baron's workers, reborn in the image of their suffering. The tomb wasn't sleeping anymore. It was remembering. Elena ran toward the field, the air burning her lungs, shouting Mateo's name. Behind her, the ground erupted in a roar of fire and light. The ruins of the Whitmore mansion, shattering upward like a volcano of gold. Victoria screamed as one of the gilded figures reached for her, its touch turning her skin to ash before her eyes. The men fled, their shouts lost in the roar. Elena stumbled through the mud, clutching her burned hands, her mind a blur of terror and grief. The fire had returned, not born of her will this time, but of the curse itself, defending what it had guarded for a century. As she reached the road, she saw Mateo ahead running, his small figure outlined by the flickering light of the burning sky. "Keep going," she cried, her voice breaking. "Don't look back. Behind her, the Whitmore estate burned for the second time, not red with destruction, but gold with revelation. And somewhere deep within the fire's heart, a single whisper rose above the chaos. The house keeps its promise. Elena didn't turn around. She couldn't. She ran toward her son, the fire at her back, the past collapsing behind her one last time. But even as she fled, she knew the gold wasn't gone. It was free, and this time it was coming for whoever dared to remember it. The road was alive with light. Not sunlight, not the clean warmth of morning, but the molten glow of the mansion's rebirth. The inferno spread in slow, majestic waves across the estate, gold and red twisting together like veins of living fire. The Whitmore curse had broken its silence, and the earth itself seemed to remember every secret that had ever been buried under its weight. Elena ran through the smoke, her lungs searing, her vision blurred by tears and ash. The air was thick and hot, the kind of heat that clings to skin like guilt. Behind her, the ruins groaned, a beast reborn, the cries of the men and Victoria Whitmore swallowed by the roar of the fire's awakening. "Matteo," she shouted, her voice cracking. "Keep running, baby." Her son's small figure darted ahead through the fog, the brass key still clenched tight in his hand, glinting each time the fire flared behind them. The sound of collapsing stone echoed like thunder. When Elena turned back for a moment, she saw them, the golden shapes rising from the ruins. Dozens of them, maybe more, human in form, but wrong in motion, jerking, shuddering, their eyes hollow pools of molten light. The lost souls of the Baron's workers, bound forever in the metal that killed them. Their movements were slow but purposeful. They weren't chasing her. They were guarding something, the vault. The curse wasn't hunting for blood, it was defending what remained. Elena stumbled to her knees, the realization burning through her like truth too heavy to hold. The fire didn't destroy blindly. It had purpose. The mansion wasn't punishing, it was protecting the world from the greed that still lived above it. But that meant the world would come again. It always did. She pushed herself up, calling out through the haze, "Matteo, don't stop." He turned just long enough for her to see his face streaked with soot and fear, but alive before he vanished down the bend in the road. Elena took one more step forward when something cold and sharp grabbed her ankle. She fell hard. The impact rattled her bones. When she looked down, her heart froze. A hand, human but coated in gold, was gripping her leg, its fingers digging into her skin. One of the Whitmore men, half consumed, his body fused with molten metal, his face twisted in terror and greed. "Elena," he rasped, his voice breaking. "Help me." She kicked, screaming, but his grip only tightened. His flesh cracked, glowing faintly, pieces of gold flaking from his arms as he dragged himself closer. "Please," he sobbed. "It's beautiful, it's—" The rest of his words vanished as his chest split open, molten light pouring out. The fire within him consumed what was left of his humanity in a flash of gold. Elena crawled backward, gasping, tears streaming down her face. The whisper came from everywhere at once, rising with the heat. "The fire protects, the gold devours." She forced herself to her feet, stumbling toward the field, the flames chasing her shadow. Each breath felt like knives, each step heavier than the last. When she reached the old iron gate, she found Matteo waiting, shaking, coughing, but alive. The glow of the mansion reflected in his eyes, painting them with the same impossible gold she had come to hate and fear. "Mom," he cried, running to her. She fell to her knees, clutching him tightly. "We have to go, we can't stop." "But what about them?" he asked through tears, pointing toward the burning estate. Elena turned her gaze back. The figures of Victoria's men were gone, swallowed by light. The mansion's silhouette, once black against the horizon, now burned from within like a sun refusing to set. And through the smoke, she thought she saw a faint shape standing in the center of it, all tall, regal, motionless. The Baron, he was no longer human, more monument than man, his body gilded entirely, his face carved into a look of endless hunger. Around him the golden souls bowed low, their bodies kneeling in reverence. "Elias," she whispered into the wind, "what have we done?" The boy's voice came faintly through the roar of the fire, not from the air, but from within her mind, the way memory speaks to conscience. "You ended what he began, but endings aren't peace. They're choices waiting to be made again." Elena's chest heaved. "Then what do I do?" The voice was gentle. "Run. The fire's work is finished here. Yours isn't." A loud crack split the air. The foundation gave way. The last standing wall of the mansion collapsed in a shower of sparks and molten dust, the sound echoing across the fields like a final heartbeat. Matteo clutched her arm. "Mom, it's falling." She pulled him close and turned away, shielding his face as the ground shook beneath them. The fire surged one last time, flaring high enough to touch the gray clouds above a tower of gold and flame stretching toward the heavens. Then, as suddenly as it had risen, it began to die. The light dimmed, the heat faded, the roar softened into a low hum that sank back into the earth. What had once been mansion, vault, and tomb was now only a smoking crater, a wound closing slowly over its own scars. The Whitmore estate was gone, completely, irrevocably gone. For a long time, neither of them spoke. They just stood there, breathing the air that tasted of metal and rain. Finally, Matteo whispered, "It's over, isn't it?" Elena looked down at him, her son, her reason for every desperate act that had led them here, and managed a weak smile. "Yes, it's over." But as she turned back toward the road, she saw movement in the ashes, a faint shimmer buried deep within the ruin. The same glint that had haunted her since the first day she set foot on the property. Gold, always gold. It wasn't alive anymore. It didn't hum, didn't glow. It just sat there cold, gleaming, waiting. Elena's voice was barely a whisper. "It never ends, does it?" "No," came the faintest reply, not from the house, not from the wind, but from somewhere deep inside her own heart. "Not until the world stops wanting what it can't keep." She took Matteo's hand. "Come on, let's go home." As they walked down the dirt road, the clouds parted. Light spilled over the field, clean, silver, untouched by smoke. The air was quiet again. Birds began to sing somewhere far away, as if daring to return to a place they had long abandoned. Elena didn't look back. Behind her, the last spark within the ruins blinked out, silent, patient, eternal, and deep beneath the scorched ground, buried under ash and memory, something metallic shifted once, faintly catching the sunlight, filtering through the cracks. Gold, still sleeping, still waiting, the curse was gone, but its hunger remained, and though Elena didn't know it yet, the fire she had set free had left its mark not just on the land, but in her blood. As the horizon swallowed the ruins behind her, a single ember followed the wind, drifting gently after her and her son, glowing faintly, quietly, like the whisper of destiny that refuses to die. The smoke clung to the horizon for 3 days. Even miles away, Elena could still see it, a grey scar, smudging the sky where the Whitmore estate once stood. The scent of ash followed the wind like memory, faint but stubborn, as though the fire refused to be forgotten. She and Matteo had taken refuge in a small roadside motel, the kind built for travelers with nowhere left to go. The walls were thin, the lights buzzed faintly, and the air smelled of mildew, but it was safe. And for the first time in weeks, Matteo slept without waking in the night. Elena sat by the window, wrapped in a blanket, staring out at the distant hills. Her reflection in the glass looked older. Worn streaks of soot still smudged her skin no matter how many times she scrubbed. Her hands trembled without reason. Each breath came slow, deliberate. She wasn't sure if she was alive or just surviving. The TV in the corner played low, a local news broadcast crackling through static. Authorities continue to investigate the mysterious fire that consumed the historic Whitmore estate late Sunday night. The anchor's voice droned. Officials have yet to determine the cause, though early reports suggest the blaze may have been fueled by unstable materials found beneath the structure. No bodies have been recovered. Elena turned the volume down. She couldn't bear it. She looked at Matteo asleep, his small body curled beneath the motel's scratchy blanket. His face was peaceful, his hand still clutching something beneath the pillow. She knew what it was without checking. The brass key. He refused to let it go, even after everything. Elena pressed her palm to the glass, her reflection shimmering faintly in the light. For the first time since the fire, she whispered it out loud, the thing that had been circling her thoughts since the night they escaped. "I killed them." The words broke something open inside her. Her throat burned. All of them. Every man who followed her. Every soul the fire took. I could have stopped it sooner. I could have. Her voice cracked. She buried her face in her hands, shaking silently as tears cut through the ash still clinging to her skin. From the bed, a soft voice came. "No, Mom." She froze. Matteo sat up, rubbing his eyes. "You didn't kill them." Elena turned, trying to compose herself. "You should be sleeping." He shook his head. "The fire told me. It said it chose you because you weren't like them." She blinked through tears. "The fire talked to you?" He nodded solemnly. "In my dream, it said you gave back what they took." Her chest tightened. "And what did they take?" Matteo looked out the window, his small voice quiet. "People's lives, their time, their hearts." Elena stared at him, her son, too young to understand the weight of such words, yet somehow carrying wisdom older than the ashes they'd left behind. "The fire said it doesn't hate people," he whispered. "It just burns what shouldn't be kept." Elena couldn't find words. She reached for him, pulling him close, kissing the top of his head. For the first time in years, she didn't feel alone. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the old motel sign until it flickered between two words, vacant and no vacancy. The storm had taken nearly everything, yet here she was still breathing, still holding on to what mattered. But peace didn't last long. The next morning the knock came, 3 sharp raps against the motel door. Elena's heart leapt. For a split second, she thought it might be one of the Whitmore men, someone who'd survived, someone looking for revenge. She grabbed the nearest thing she could find, a broken chair leg, and crept toward the door. "Who is it?" she demanded. A pause. Then a calm voice replied, "Mrs. Ramirez, my name is Detective Sawyer. May I come in?" She hesitated. Through the peephole, she saw a man in a dark coat, his badge glinting faintly in the morning light. His face looked kind, but cautious, the kind of man who'd seen too many stories that didn't end cleanly. Elena opened the door halfway, keeping the chain locked. "What do you want?" The detective nodded respectfully. "I'm investigating the Whitmore fire. We have some questions about your connection to the property." "I already spoke to the police," she said. "I told them what I knew." He sighed. "Ma'am, I think you know more than what's in that report." Her fingers tightened around the edge of the door. "You think I caused it? I think you survived something that doesn't make sense," Sawyer said carefully. "And I think you're not telling me everything because you're trying to protect your boy." She didn't answer. Her silence was confession enough. He continued gently, "You and your son were the only ones seen leaving before the explosion. The others, Whitmore's people, are gone. No remains, no trace, just melted gold in the soil." Elena's breath caught. "Gold?" He nodded. "Enough to rebuild the entire house twice over. But it's fused to the earth, impossible to move." She closed her eyes, whispering, "It's not gold anymore." The detective tilted his head. "Excuse me." Her voice trembled. "It's what's left of them." He stared at her for a long moment, something shifting in his expression. "Ma'am, do you need help?" She almost laughed. Help. That word felt too small for the kind of ghosts that followed her now. "I just need to leave," she said finally, Far from that place, far from its memory. The detective nodded slowly. If you remember anything, call me. He slipped a card through the gap in the door. His eyes softened. You did what you had to do to survive. Don't let anyone tell you different. When he left, Elena stood there for a long time, the card trembling in her hand. She turned it over. Detective Samuel Sawyer. County Division. But what caught her eye wasn't his name. It was the small golden smudge near the bottom corner of the card, like a fingerprint made of metal dust. Her pulse quickened. No. She dropped the card, stepping back as though it had burned her. The mark shimmered faintly before fading. A whisper brushed her ear, so soft she almost believed she imagined it. The gold remembers. She turned toward Matteo. He was staring at her, his small hand still clutching the brass key. Elias, she asked quietly. He shook his head, not him. Her stomach turned cold. Then who? Matteo's eyes filled with something she hadn't seen since the night of the fire fear. The one who sleeps under the fire. Elena froze, her breath catching in her throat. Outside, the morning light dimmed as if something unseen had passed across the sun. She looked toward the horizon, where the distant smoke from the estate still smeared the sky like a bruise that wouldn't heal. The Whitmore mansion was gone, but what lay beneath it was not, and deep in her pocket, the brass key grew warm again, a faint heartbeat pulsing through the metal, reminding her that the story she thought had ended had only changed shape. Night crept over the small motel like a tide of exhaustion. The flickering neon sign outside bathed the room in weak red light, the word vacant blinking like a dying heartbeat. The world beyond the glass was still too still. Elena sat on the edge of the bed, her elbows on her knees, the brass key glinting between her fingers. It pulsed faintly, a soft, rhythmic glow that felt uncomfortably alive. Every time she thought about throwing it away, she remembered what happened the last time she ignored the fire's call. Across the room, Matteo slept soundly, clutching his stuffed bear against his chest. His breathing was even, calm, a mercy she didn't deserve, but sleep refused to touch her. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the fire again, not as destruction, but as memory, the Baron's gold melting into faces. The vault breathing, the screams of men who thought they could command something older than sin, and beneath it all, the voice that would not die. The fire protects, the gold devours. A sudden gust of wind rattled the window. Elena flinched, staring at the glass. Outside, the night was thick with fog, the kind that muffled sound, swallowing even the hum of the nearby highway. Then came a sound she couldn't mistake, a slow knock at the door. 3 beats, the same pattern as before. Elena's blood ran cold. Her voice cracked. Who's there? No answer. She rose, every muscle tight, every instinct screaming. The brass key burned hot in her hand. She took a slow step toward the door, her bare feet silent on the thin carpet. Through the peephole she saw only fog, but the air beyond shimmered faintly, golden light bleeding through the mist. Her pulse thundered. No, she whispered, not again. Another knock, louder. Mom, Matteo's voice came, groggy and frightened. Who is it? She turned quickly. Stay in bed, sweetheart. He sat up, eyes wide. It's glowing. Elena spun. The brass key in her hand was now blazing with light, its grooves molten, symbols she hadn't seen before emerging across its surface, the same markings she'd seen in the vault. The walls trembled softly. The TV hissed with static. Elias, she whispered into the dark, is that you? The reply came in a voice that wasn't Elias's, older, deeper, distant like an echo through centuries. The fire remembers its keeper, but the gold never sleeps. The motel lights flickered violently. The lamp shattered, spraying glass across the floor. Matteo screamed. Elena grabbed him, pulling him close. It's okay. I've got you. But the fog outside pressed harder against the windows, and within it, something shimmered, not light, but reflection. Dozens of faint golden outlines, shifting like bodies made of metal dust. Figures without faces, the souls of the gilded, the ones who had burned beneath the Baron's greed. They were coming. Elena clutched Matteo tighter, her heart pounding. "What do you want from us?" she shouted into the empty room. The whisper came again, layered, many voices speaking as one. "You carry what cannot die." Her eyes dropped to the key. The glow pulsed like a living heart. The truth hit her with the force of lightning. The fire had chosen her to end the curse, but the curse had chosen her to continue it. The fire wasn't just reborn. It had passed through her. "Mom." Matteo's small voice trembled. "It's inside you, isn't it?" She didn't answer. She couldn't, because he was right. Her hands shook violently. The air around her shimmered faintly with heat, subtle at first, then growing stronger. The smell of smoke filled the room. "No," she whispered, "not here, not again." She stumbled toward the sink, turned the faucet, and plunged her burning hands beneath the cold water. Steam hissed as the heat met the chill. But the glow didn't fade. From behind her, Matteo's frightened voice cracked. "The fire says it's not angry. It just wants to go home." Elena turned, drenched in sweat. "Home," he pointed toward the window. Toward the faint, smoky horizon, back toward the ashes of the Whitmore estate. Her knees nearly buckled. "It wants to go back." The whisper came once more, gentle now, almost sorrowful. What was born in flame must return to it. The key in her palm seared her skin. She dropped it with a cry. It hit the floor and the carpet blackened instantly, tiny embers spreading like veins. The fog outside brightened, the golden shapes moving closer. She realized then it wasn't coming to harm her. It was coming to collect her. "Elias," she gasped, voice breaking, "please tell me what to do." The boy's voice, faint but clear, answered within her mind. "The fire is free because of you. Now you must free yourself from it." Her heart pounded. "How?" "Burn what it remembers." Her eyes darted to the nightstand, and the notebook she'd been keeping since the beginning, the drawings, the pages filled with every secret she'd written to make sense of it all. Every detail of the curse. She grabbed it, tears burning her eyes. "You want me to destroy this. It remembers through you." Elena looked down at the trembling notebook, her handwriting scrawled across soot-stained pages. Each word had weight, each line a scar she'd carved into existence. She hesitated only a moment, then she struck the motel's lighter. The flame caught fast, pages curled, blackened, and turned to ash. The smell of burning paper filled the air, sharp, bitter, final. As the last page disintegrated, the fog outside began to fade. The golden figures dissolved, their forms unraveling into dust that drifted upward, merging with the stars. The key dimmed, the heat faded from her skin. The silence that followed was immense, not empty, but peaceful. Elena sank to the floor, clutching Matteo, both of them trembling as the glow disappeared from the walls. He whispered against her chest, "Is it gone?" She nodded weakly, kissing his hair. "Yes, baby, it's gone." Outside, the fog lifted completely, revealing a clear night sky. The smoke on the horizon was gone, the air finally still. Elena stepped outside, barefoot, the cold asphalt grounding her to the world again. The key lay on the threshold behind her, dull and lifeless. She looked up at the stars, distant, infinite, unbothered by human sin. And, for the first time in what felt like forever, she let herself breathe. Her voice broke into the quiet, soft and trembling, "Thank you." A single ember drifted past her cheek, small, harmless, fading as it fell. Elena reached out, catching it in her palm. It glowed once, briefly, then died. She smiled. "Rest now." Behind her, Matteo's voice called gently, "Mom." She turned. her face illuminated by the motel's soft red light. "Yes, sweetheart." He pointed at the door. The key stopped glowing. She nodded. "Good. That means it's done." He smiled faintly, tired. "Can we go home now?" Elena looked out at the open road, the first faint blush of dawn bleeding across the horizon. "Yes," she said softly. "We can finally go home." As they stepped back into the room to gather their things, neither of them noticed the faint shimmer that lingered just beyond the edge of the parking lot, a soft, golden haze hovering in the air, like the memory of fire saying goodbye. The curse was broken. The fire had found its peace, and in the quiet space between smoke and salvation, Elena Ramirez finally found hers too. Morning sunlight poured over the ruins of the Whitmore estate like a benediction. The fire was gone. The smoke had thinned. Only the smell of damp soot and burned oak remained, a scent that clung to the wind, faint but stubborn, as though even nature refused to forget what had happened there. A week had passed since the night the mansion fell for the second time. Elena hadn't returned, not yet. She and Matteo stayed with a family friend on the edge of town, far from the valley and its ghosts. But every morning she found herself walking to the ridge that overlooked the estate, unable to resist the pull of unfinished stories. From that distance, the once grand Whitmore mansion was nothing but a black scar on the landscape, twisted beams, shattered stone, and the faint glint of gold buried beneath layers of ash. Greed never died easy. Elena stood there now, her hands deep in her coat pockets, the cold morning air stinging her cheeks. The brass key hung from a chain around her neck, dull and lifeless, now a relic of something that once tried to consume her. She'd kept it not out of fear, but out of understanding. The fire had ended, but the truth beneath it was still buried. And truth, she knew, had a way of haunting the living until it was brought into the light. Behind her, a car door closed softly. Detective Sawyer's voice came through the crisp air. "You've been coming here every day." Elena didn't turn. "You keeping tabs on me, detective. Concern, not suspicion," he said, stepping beside her. His coat was buttoned tight, his hair ruffled by the wind. "They've officially closed the investigation. The estate's off limits now. Government reclamation order." She nodded slowly. "So they're taking it. They're claiming it," he corrected. "What's left of it? They think there's historical value buried under the rubble." Elena gave a small, bitter laugh. "There's history, all right, but not the kind they'll want to publish." Sawyer watched her for a moment. "You've seen things, Mrs. Ramirez, things no one could explain. If there's anything more I should know, there isn't." She cut in gently. "Not anymore." He sighed. "Then maybe it's time to let it rest." She finally turned toward him, her eyes distant but calm. "I tried, but the house didn't burn for no reason, detective. It wanted something revealed." Sawyer frowned. "Revealed?" Elena nodded, her gaze drifting back to the ruins below. "Everything that burns leaves something behind." A silence fell between them, heavy with understanding neither could name. He checked his watch, then stepped back toward his car. "We'll have crews out here tomorrow. Just be careful, Mrs. Ramirez. People are going to start digging again, and not everyone digs for truth." She watched him leave, his car disappearing down the dirt road. When he was gone, she turned back toward the ruins. The morning light caught something strange, a flicker, a reflection. Elena squinted, shielding her eyes. A glint of gold peeked through the collapsed stones near the old fireplace foundation. But it wasn't the raw gleam of treasure. It was duller, more deliberate, like metal pressed into shape. A corner of something square. Her heart kicked. No. She made her way down the ridge, boots sinking into the soft, charred earth. Each step stirred gray dust into the air. The closer she got, the stronger the smell of burned wood became, sharp and bitter, mixed with the faint sweetness of something once precious turned to rot. At the base of the ruin, she knelt and brushed away the ash. The glint grew clearer, a small, half-buried metal box, its edges scorched but intact. Her hands trembled as she dug it free. The lock was melted, the hinges weak. With one sharp pull, the lid gave way. Inside lay a small, leather-bound book. The cover was blackened, its edges curled from heat. But when she opened it, the writing inside was untouched, neat, elegant script, written in dark ink that had survived where even gold had melted. The title on the first page stopped her breath. Ledger of the Whitmore Mining Company, 1919-1922. Her pulse raced. Each page was filled with names, men, women, children, workers, hundreds of them. Next to each name, a column labeled wages due, and beside that, a second column labeled paid in full. But none of the names had been crossed out. Every single one ended the same way, unpaid. Her stomach turned. She flipped through page after page until she reached the back. There, in a trembling hand, a single note had been written sideways across the final entry. They died for gold that wasn't theirs, but neither was it mine. I built my fortune on their bones, and so I bury it with them. Let no man profit from my sin. Baron James Whitmore. Elena stared at the page, her vision blurring with tears. The truth was here, the curse, the greed, the suffering that had fed the mansion for generations. The fire hadn't been vengeance, it had been confession. She clutched the ledger to her chest, her heart aching. The ghosts hadn't wanted to be avenged, they'd wanted to be remembered. The wind picked up, scattering the ashes around her like snow. The ruins groaned softly in the breeze, the faint echo of a place that had finally spoken its truth. "Thank you," she whispered into the wind. As she rose, the sun broke through the clouds, golden light washing over the ruins. The beams caught the soot in the air, making it sparkle faintly, not like gold, but like dust made holy by forgiveness. For the first time, the land didn't feel cursed. It felt cleansed. Elena looked down at the ledger one more time, her reflection caught faintly in its scorched cover. "You can rest now," she whispered. "All of you." Then, slowly, she began walking back toward the road. In the distance, the faint sound of construction crews echoed, trucks, voices, the metallic ring of shovels striking earth. The world would dig again, searching for wealth, for legacy, for anything that glittered in the dirt. But they wouldn't find gold this time. They'd find names, and perhaps finally they'd understand that some debts are paid not with money, but with truth. Elena held the ledger tighter as she walked away, her shadow stretching long across the scarred earth. The Whitmore fire had taken everything, her fear, her home, her innocence, but it had given her something in return. A voice, a story, a chance to build something pure from what was once poisoned. As the morning sun climbed higher, the last wisps of smoke disappeared from the valley, and the ashes of greed finally turned to dust. Elena didn't sleep that night. The ledger sat on the table before her, its pages open, each line a confession that time had buried. The ink shimmered faintly beneath the lamplight, the words alive in a way that made her feel both reverence and sorrow. The dead were finally speaking, and they had chosen her to listen. Matteo was asleep in the next room, curled beneath the blanket, his face soft and peaceful. For the first time since the fire, he looked like a child again, not a witness, not a survivor, just a boy. Elena brushed a trembling hand over the ledger's brittle pages. There were over 300 names. Men and women who had mined the earth under the Whitmore family's command, building their empire one shovelful at a time. The wages beside their names unpaid. Decades of debt written in elegant script, sealed by silence and greed. The words of the Baron echoed faintly from the last page. "Let no man profit from my sin." But they had, his descendants, his legacy, his bloodline. They had built fortunes on top of the bones of the forgotten. And now, as she stared down at the proof, Elena knew the fire had never wanted destruction. It wanted justice. She spent the early hours photocopying every page at the local library, the old machine whirring quietly under flickering lights. When the clerk asked if it was for a lawsuit, she simply said, "It's for history." By dawn, she walked into the county records office, the copies sealed in a weathered envelope, her hands shaking with exhaustion but guided by purpose. The clerk, a tired man in his 50s, looked up. "Ma'am," she set the envelope on the counter. "I have something for the Historical Restitution Division." He frowned. "We don't really handle personal documents. This isn't personal," she said quietly, sliding the envelope forward. "It's truth." He studied her face for a moment, something in her tone silencing the polite refusal on his lips. He took the envelope, curiosity flickering behind his eyes. "What's this about? Unpaid debts," Elena replied. "And the people who died paying them." Later that afternoon, the story broke. The ledger of Baron James Whitmore made front-page headlines before sunset. "Century, old ledger exposes exploitation of miners beneath historic estate." Experts confirmed the handwriting. Government officials descended on the ruins. Archaeologists unearthed what the fire hadn't destroyed: tools, helmets, melted ore, and human remains. Dozens of them. The news spread faster than the flames ever had. For the first time in 100 years, the Whitmore name was no longer spoken with admiration or envy, but with guilt. Elena watched it unfold from the small motel room television, her coffee growing cold beside her. She wasn't proud, she wasn't triumphant, she was simply relieved it was done. That night, Detective Sawyer returned, knocking softly at her door. When she opened it, he didn't ask questions, he just held up the newspaper. "You did this, didn't you?" She didn't deny it. "It wasn't me," she said softly. "It was the fire." He studied her, his eyes narrowing slightly. "You know, some of my guys think you were lucky to survive that night." She smiled faintly. "Luck doesn't survive fire, only truth does." He hesitated, then nodded. "For what it's worth, Mrs. Ramirez, you did the right thing." When he left, she sat by the window again, looking out at the highway lights stretching into the distance. Her reflection in the glass looked different now, still tired, still marked by loss, but no longer haunted. The fire had taken almost everything, but in return, it had burned away the lie that kept so many forgotten. A few days later, a government official called. The gold found beneath the estate had been officially reclaimed by the state. It was considered evidence in a century-long case of theft and industrial exploitation. But there was something else. A restitution fund was being formed in the name of the miners and their descendants, and because Elena had uncovered the ledger, she was entitled to a portion of the recovered value. When she hung up the phone, she sat in silence, staring at the dull brass key on the table. The irony wasn't lost on her. The very thing that had cursed generations was now offering her deliverance. That evening, Matteo joined her at the table, his small hand finding hers. "Is the fire really gone now?" Elena squeezed his fingers gently. "It's resting. It did what it needed to do." He smiled softly. "So it's free, yes," she whispered. "We all are." She opened the envelope the government had sent her inside, a check large enough to change their lives. But her hands didn't tremble from greed or excitement. They trembled because she finally understood what the fire had meant all along. Gold could buy comfort, but only truth could buy peace. The next morning, she drove back to the ruins one last time. The reconstruction crews had left for the weekend. The land was quiet again, nothing but wind, grass, and the sound of life returning. She stood in the center of what had once been the grand hall, the ledger pressed against her chest. The ground beneath her feet was no longer hot. The air smelled of new earth. She knelt and placed the original ledger, not the copies, into the soil. "This is where you belong," she whispered. "Not in vaults, not in banks, not in hands that don't remember." She covered it gently with earth, her fingers black with soot and dirt. When she rose, the morning light broke through the clouds, catching the edge of something buried just beneath her feet, a faint glimmer of gold. But it wasn't a warning anymore, it was a memory. Elena smiled through her tears. The mansion was gone, the curse had ended. The fire had delivered its truth. And now, finally, it was time to rebuild, not with greed, but with grace. As she walked back toward her car, the wind picked up, carrying with it a faint, familiar warmth. For a moment, she thought she heard Elias's voice, distant, gentle, and free. "True wealth lies in what the fire cannot burn." She closed her eyes, letting the wind move through her hair. When she opened them again, the world was brighter. The past had turned to smoke, and in its place, something new began to rise, not from the mansion's ashes, but from her own heart. Elena Ramirez, the woman who once bought ruin for $700, had found the one thing worth more than all the gold buried beneath the earth. A year passed before the land breathed again. Where once stood a mansion of greed and ruin, wildflowers now painted the soil in colors the fire could never destroy: yellows, whites, soft blues swaying in the wind like forgiveness made visible. Grass had crept across the charred foundation, reclaiming it inch by inch, until even the earth seemed to whisper that the past had served its time. Elena stood at the edge of the field, a single spade in her hand. Matteo stood beside her, taller now, his hair catching the light as if some of the fire had chosen to stay with him. In his other hand, he held a small wooden sign, freshly painted with careful strokes. It read, "Hearth House Shelter for All." The morning air was clean. Birds circled overhead. The world at last felt new. Elena looked over the open land, her voice soft but steady. Hard to believe this was ever a place of ghosts. Matteo smiled faintly. "Maybe it still is," he said, "but now they're the kind that help." She laughed quietly, the sound breaking through the stillness like sunlight through fog. They had returned not to mourn, but to build. Months of meetings, permits, and promises had led to this moment, the first day of construction for something born entirely from ashes. The restitution fund, born from the ledger's truth, had grown into something larger than Elena ever imagined. Donations poured in from across the country. Once the story of the Whitmore fire spread not the sensational headlines about gold or ghosts, but the story of a mother who uncovered history and refused to let it stay buried. With those funds, Elena bought back the land the government had seized, not to rebuild a mansion but to raise a home, not for herself but for others like her, single mothers, lost sons, those who had been burned by life and had nowhere else to go. The first foundation of Hearth House would be laid exactly where the Whitmore fireplace had once stood. Elias would like this, Matteo said quietly, looking toward the center of the field. Elena nodded. He would. A small group of volunteers arrived: carpenters, teachers, neighbors, even strangers who had read her story and come to help. They brought shovels, hammers, and warm smiles. When the first beam was lifted, sunlight hit the polished wood, gleaming gold, not the greedy, heavy kind of gold that once cursed this place, but the light of honest work, the shimmer of something pure. By noon, laughter filled the air. The land that had once echoed with screams now hummed with the rhythm of building, the steady beat of nails and the creak of new lumber. Elena worked alongside them, sleeves rolled up, her hands blistered and raw, but she didn't stop. Every nail, every brick felt like penance. Every sound of progress was another ghost finally laid to rest. At one point, an older man approached her, a local historian who'd come to see the progress. His hands were rough, his clothes simple, his eyes kind. "You know," he said, looking out over the frame rising from the soil, "this ground was always meant for fire, just not the kind that destroys." Elena smiled softly. "Then maybe this time it'll burn for warmth." He nodded, tipping his hat before walking away, leaving her with the sound of hammers and wind. As the sun began to set, the outline of the first building stood tall against the horizon. Nothing grand, nothing ornate. Just strong, honest. Matteo tugged her sleeve. "Mom, yeah, honey." He pointed toward the newly laid hearthstone at the center of the floor. "Can I light it?" She hesitated, emotion tightening her chest. "The first fire," he nodded eagerly. "For them, for us." Elena smiled, tears filling her eyes. "Yes, I think that's exactly what this place needs." They gathered a few small twigs, stacking them gently inside the hearth's hollow. The sun dipped lower, the air growing cool. Matteo struck the match. The flame was small, fragile but steady. It flickered, danced, and began to grow, casting a golden glow over their faces. For a moment no one spoke. The volunteers stood in silence, watching the fire take its breath, its first breath within the house that would carry its name. Elena knelt beside her son, the light flickering in her eyes. "Do you feel that?" she whispered. He nodded, smiling. "It feels like home." The warmth spread gently through the half-built structure, curling around wood and stone like a promise kept. For a long moment, Elena thought she saw movement beyond the flames, faint silhouettes watching from the edge of the field. Dozens of them, men and women standing in the tall grass, faces soft, golden in the firelight, the miners, the lost, the ones whose names she had freed from the ledger's ink. They didn't look tormented anymore. They looked at peace. Elena's breath caught. One of them, a small figure among the rest, stepped forward. Elias. He smiled, faint but radiant, and raised his hand in a slow wave. The firelight flickered once as if answering him, and when she blinked, the field was empty again. Matteo squeezed her hand. "He's happy now." She nodded, her tears falling silently into the soil. "So am I." Night descended gently over the valley, but the fire at Hearth House burned on, warm, alive, unwavering. The land that had once known only greed now carried laughter, hope, and the promise of something greater than gold. And as the stars emerged overhead, one spark lifted from the fire, drifting upward into the night sky, small, brilliant, eternal. Elena watched it rise until it disappeared into the heavens, her voice barely a whisper. "Thank you for keeping the fire." Matteo leaned against her side, his head resting on her shoulder. "What happens now?" Elena smiled, her eyes reflecting the glow. "Now," she said softly, "we build." The wind moved gently through the half-built beams, carrying the warmth of the new fire outward across the fields, over the ruins, into the waiting world. And somewhere deep beneath the soil, the ashes stirred once more, not in unrest, but in remembrance. The land had been purified, the fire reborn. This time it would burn only for love. Weeks passed, and Hearth House began to take shape, not as a monument to tragedy, but as a living symbol of renewal. The first walls stood upright, freshly painted in soft cream and cedar tones. The air smelled of new wood and fresh soil, of beginnings untainted by greed. The sound of hammers and laughter replaced the echoes of fire that once haunted the valley. For the first time, the land did not whisper of loss, it sang with life. Every board, every nail, every brushstroke seemed to hum with unseen gratitude. The workers said it was just the wind. Elena knew better. The dead were not gone. They were watching. Each day, More volunteers arrived, strangers who'd read her story in newspapers, on screens, in whispers. Donations poured in, some from people she'd never met, others from descendants of the miners listed in the ledger. They came with tears, with hope, with apologies that spanned generations. One old man arrived in a weathered pickup truck one morning. His eyes were pale blue, his hands shaking as he stepped out, clutching an old photograph. He handed it to Elena without a word. It was faded, black and white, a group of miners standing before the original mansion in 1921. Their faces were tired but proud. On the back, written in pencil, "Thomas Hargrove, my grandfather, one of the ones who never came home." The name struck her like lightning. Hargrove. The man nodded slowly. "Yeah, I'm all that's left of that bloodline. I don't blame you for what happened to my cousin." "Victoria," she whispered. He nodded again, his voice rough. "She spent her whole life chasing what wasn't meant to be kept. You let it go." Elena swallowed hard, her voice barely steady. "I didn't let it go. The fire did." He looked out over the half-built shelter, tears catching the morning light. "Then maybe it finally burned the curse out of our name." She placed a hand over his, the photograph between them. "No curse ever outlives love." He smiled faintly, nodded, and drove away, leaving behind the picture a fragment of the past ready to rest at last. By early spring, the first wing of Hearth House stood complete. It wasn't grand or ornate, just beautiful in its honesty. A row of modest rooms, wide windows facing the sunrise, and a great hall with a single stone hearth at its center. The same hearthstone that had survived every fire, the same one that refused to die. Elena ran her hand along its cool surface, whispering softly, "You've burned enough. Now you get to warm." That night, they lit the hearth for the first time as a home. Not for ceremony, but because the air was cool, and laughter filled the room. Children who had no homes of their own sat on the floor beside the fire, their faces glowing in its soft light. Women shared stories, hands clasped around mugs of tea. Volunteers rested their tired bodies near the warmth, content in the quiet hum of purpose fulfilled. Elena stood back, watching them, her heart full in a way it hadn't been since before the fire, before the debt, before everything. Matteo ran up beside her, breathless with excitement. "Mom, they love it here," she smiled, brushing a lock of hair from his forehead. "That's the point, sweetheart. This house isn't just ours anymore, it's everyone's." He grinned, looking up at the flickering fire. "Do you think it remembers?" She followed his gaze, the flames dancing like memory itself. "Oh, it remembers," she whispered, "but not the pain, just the warmth." The firelight shimmered across the walls, catching the framed photograph of the miners she had placed above the hearth. Beneath it, a brass plaque gleamed softly in the light, in memory of those who built the fire. "May your names live where no flame can touch." Tears welled in her eyes as she read it again. The ledger had been buried, but their stories had not. They lived here now in walls that would never collapse, in warmth that would never destroy. Outside, the wind rose gently, curling through the fields of wildflowers. The tall grass swayed, bending toward the light that glowed softly through Hearth House's windows. It was as if the earth itself bowed to what it had witnessed ruin transformed into grace. Later that night, long after the others had gone to bed, Elena sat alone by the hearth. The fire was low, embers glowing faintly. The brass key hung from her neck, cold against her skin. She took it in her hand, turning it slowly. It no longer burned, no longer hummed. It was only metal now, heavy, ordinary, harmless. "I think we've done enough," she whispered. "You can rest too." She set it gently into the flames. The metal hissed softly, then began to glow, melting slowly until it became one with the embers, until there was no difference between what had cursed her and what had saved her. A single tear rolled down her cheek, falling into the fire. It sizzled, vanished, and with it, so did the last trace of the curse. The wind outside shifted, carrying warmth through the open window, not hot, not harsh. Just kind. Elena closed her eyes and breathed it in. She could almost hear Elias's voice again, a whisper in the rustle of the grass. The soft hum of the fire, the stillness of peace at last. You kept the promise. Her lips curved in a trembling smile. No, little one, she whispered, we kept it together. As dawn broke, golden light spilled across the new floors of Hearth House. The children began to stir, laughter already echoing through the halls. The smell of breakfast rose from the kitchen. Life, simple, beautiful, ordinary life. Elena stood at the doorway, watching the sunrise pour through the windows, lighting the walls in a hue of soft gold. This time gold was not greed, it was warmth. She turned to the fire, its embers steady, alive. You did good, she murmured. Then she stepped outside, her bare feet pressing into dew, soaked grass, and looked out at the valley that once held only ghosts. Now it held hope. From the ashes of sin, she had built sanctuary. From the fire of greed, she had forged kindness. And from a ruin worth $700, she had built something priceless. As the morning wind carried the scent of hearth smoke and blooming flowers, Elena Ramirez smiled through her tears and whispered the words that had become her truth. True wealth lies in what the fire cannot burn. And above her the clouds parted, the sunlight spilling down like a blessing upon the ground where fire had once ruled, a quiet, eternal promise that the story of the house, the curse, and the woman who dared to face it would live forever. Years passed, and the story became legend. The valley that once bore the scars of smoke and ruin now thrived with the hum of life. The fields bloomed wild each spring, the air thick with the scent of lilac and fresh rain. Children played where ghosts once whispered, their laughter rising like music through the wind. And at the heart of it all stood Hearth House, warm, steadfast, alive. Its walls were painted soft white now, the wood gleaming honey, gold in the morning light. Every day, its chimney breathed a gentle stream of smoke, not as a warning, but as a signal of belonging, proof that warmth still lived there. Inside, photographs lined the main hall. Some showed the early days of construction, others the faces of the families who had come through its doors, mothers, children, lost souls who found something like peace beneath its roof. In the center hung a single image larger than the rest, Elena and Matteo, smiling before the finished hearth on opening day, the firelight painting their faces with quiet triumph. The years had been kind to them. Elena's hair had turned silver, soft as ash, her hands lined from decades of work, but her eyes still carried that spark, the same one the fire had once given her. Matteo had grown tall, broad-shouldered, with the same calm steadiness she once prayed he would keep. He now ran Hearth House himself, continuing what she began. And though the house was filled with new life, there was still a moment each evening just before the sun disappeared when the air grew still, and everyone inside felt it. The warmth, the quiet hum, the breath of the fire that once saved them all. On this day, the air shimmered with that same familiar peace. The sky glowed orange and gold as the sun sank low over the valley. Matteo stood outside by the memorial stone, his daughter 8 years old and curious beside him. She traced her small fingers over the engraved words. In memory of Elena Ramirez, she lit the fire that saved us all. "Daddy," she said softly, "was Grandma really not scared of the fire?" Matteo smiled faintly. "Oh, she was scared," he said, "more than anyone, but courage isn't about not being afraid. It's about walking through the fear anyway." The little girl frowned thoughtfully. Did she really find gold? He chuckled, crouching beside her. She did, but not the kind people think. What kind, then? He looked out toward the house, the light spilling through its windows, laughter floating on the air. She found the kind that makes the world better, the kind you can't spend, only share. The girl tilted her head, her dark curls catching the sunlight. Like love, he smiled, exactly. The breeze moved through the tall grass, bending it gently toward the old foundation where the mansion once stood. The earth there was different now, richer, fertile, dotted with flowers that bloomed every spring without fail. Matteo took his daughter's hand, leading her toward the great hearth inside. The fire was already burning steady, calm, welcoming. The air smelled of oak and cinnamon. As they sat before it, the girl rested her chin on her knees. "Did Grandma live here a long time? Long enough," he said quietly, "long enough to turn ashes into hope?" She looked up at the fire, her eyes wide. "Sometimes, when it's really quiet, I think I hear something in the flames, like a whisper." Matteo froze, his breath catching. "A whisper," she nodded. "It says, 'Keep the fire.'" He smiled softly, eyes glistening. "Then you're hearing right." Outside, the wind shifted, carrying the scent of blooming lavender through the open windows. The fire crackled gently, and for a moment, the flicker of flame formed the faint outline of a woman's face, kind, strong, watching. Elena. She didn't speak, but the warmth that filled the room said everything words never could. Matteo bowed his head slightly, whispering, "I know, Mom, we're keeping it burning." The flame shimmered once, then returned to its soft, steady glow. Later, after the guests had gone and Hearth House fell quiet, Matteo stood alone by the old window that faced the valley. The moonlight washed over the land, and in the distance, the wind rustled through the wildflowers that now grew over the mansion's forgotten foundations. He could almost see her there, the young mother standing in the ashes, clutching her son, defying the curse of greed and the weight of despair. The woman who bought ruin for $700 and built salvation from its bones. The world had forgotten the Baron's name, but it would never forget hers. A soft knock pulled him from his thoughts. His daughter peeked in, holding a candle. "Daddy, can I stay up a little? I want to tell the story again." He smiled. "You remember it already?" She grinned proudly. "Of course." Grandma found a burned house, but instead of running away, she made it her home. And then she found the gold not in the ground, but in her heart. He chuckled softly, lifting her into his arms. "You're telling it better than I ever could." She snuggled close. "It's not just a story, is it?" "No," he said, looking into the fire's warm glow. "It's a promise." She tilted her head. "A promise for what?" He looked out the window one last time, the stars gleaming over the valley. "That no matter how dark life gets, there's always something worth lighting again." The little girl yawned, her eyes growing heavy. "Then I'll keep the fire too." He smiled, kissing her forehead. That's all she ever wanted. As she drifted to sleep in his arms, the fire burned quietly behind them, soft, golden, eternal. Outside, the valley lay in silence, bathed in moonlight. And just beyond the field, where the Baron's vault had once been, the earth glimmered faintly beneath the grass, not gold, not cursed metal, but light reflected from the house above, where love had taken root in the very soil of what was once ruin. The fire had finally fulfilled its purpose. It had burned away greed. It had revealed truth. And in its wake, it had left something eternal, a legacy. A story passed from mother to son, from son to daughter. A flame that would never die. The years rolled forward, gentle and relentless. Seasons turned over the valley like pages in an old book. The fields changed from gold to green to white and back again, but Hearth House remained steadfast, glowing at the heart of it all. The same house that had once been built upon ashes was now the place where stories began. Each year, on the anniversary of its opening, the townspeople gathered around the great hearth. They told the story again of the woman who found gold behind a fireplace and discovered that true treasure was never metal at all. Some told it as history, others as myth. But to those who had walked its halls, it was truth. The fire crackled in the center of the great hall that night, warm and familiar. The air shimmered with the soft glow of candlelight as families filled the room. On the wall above the mantel, a framed photograph watched over them. Elena Ramirez, her eyes bright, her smile gentle. Beneath it hung the words she'd once whispered in the ashes, "True wealth lies in what the fire cannot burn." Mateo stood before the crowd, older now, streaks of grey threading through his hair. In his hands he held a small box, dark oak, polished smooth by time. He took a breath. "My mother wanted me to keep this safe," he began, his voice soft, carrying through the hall. "She said when I finally understood what the fire meant, not what it destroyed, but what it gave, I'd know what to do with it." He opened the box. Inside lay a small vial, clear glass, half filled with fine black ash, the last remnant of the fire that had started everything. Gasps murmured through the crowd. Mateo smiled faintly. "This is all that's left of the mansion, of the fire that took it, and of the curse that built it. My mother carried it for years, not as a reminder of pain, but of purpose." He knelt by the hearth and poured the ashes into the flames. The fire flared briefly, then settled again, steady, glowing. "It's time it came home," he whispered. The air shimmered with warmth. For a heartbeat, the flames rose higher, brighter, curling into the faint outline of a woman's figure, proud, serene, luminous. Elena, Mateo's breath caught. His daughter, standing beside him, reached out instinctively, her eyes wide. "Daddy." "She's smiling." He nodded, tears glinting in the light. "She always does when the fire's at peace." The figure dissolved into the glow, becoming one with it, and the flame steadied once more, not roaring, not consuming, but breathing, alive. Outside, the wind carried the sound of laughter from the house, scattering it across the valley like seeds. The night sky stretched wide above, stars blinking through the dark, endless, ancient, unjudging. After the ceremony, when the hall had emptied and the fire burned low, Mateo stepped outside. The moon hung full over the hills, washing the land in silver light. The wildflowers bowed under the cool breeze, their petals catching the faint glow from the windows behind him. He walked to the edge of the property, where the foundation stones of the old mansion still slept beneath the soil. Kneeling, he brushed his hand across the earth. "It was warm. I hope you're proud," he whispered. The wind shifted, carrying with it a familiar scent, faint smoke, soft jasmine, and something else, the memory of her voice. "Keep the fire." Mateo smiled, eyes glistening. "Always." He rose and turned back toward the house. The windows glowed like lanterns in the distance, the great chimney releasing its steady ribbon of smoke. For a moment it looked as though the whole valley breathed with it, alive, whole, forgiven. As he stepped inside, the warmth met him like an embrace. His daughter slept in a chair by the hearth, curled beneath a blanket, her hair haloed in gold from the firelight. He stood there quietly, watching her, the next keeper of the flame, and as the embers cracked softly, he realized something his mother must have known all along. Fire was never about destruction. It was about continuation, the passing of light from one soul to another, from ruin to rebuilding, from pain to peace. He knelt beside his daughter, brushing her hair from her face, whispering softly, "It's yours now." The fire popped gently, as if answering him. And somewhere deep within the quiet, unseen but felt, a faint glow shimmered beneath the old foundation, one last time, not a warning, but a heartbeat. The land remembered, the fire remembered, but not as curse or burden, as legacy, a promise that warmth once found should never be lost again. The night settled over Hearth House, soft and infinite. Inside, the fire burned patient, pure, eternal. And as the stars wheeled overhead, their light reflected faintly in the smoke rising from the chimney, as though the heavens themselves carried the same quiet vow: "From ashes we rise, from ruin we remember, and from fire we begin again."